into that, and I'm going to introduce crew members for the members of the crew, the USS Billings. But before I move into that, Chris, do you have anything in the way of preliminaries?
I do not have anything for you preliminary, so.
Okay, well, let's start with the most important then, which is we had the privilege of members of the crew from the USS Billings are with us. They arrived in Billings yesterday, and they'll be here through the week. Today they were at the Boys and Girls Club. Most importantly, the Burger Dive, where at least a few of them had the behemoth, or how do you say it? Behemoth. Yeah, you know, the burger that's like this. And we took them up the Yellowstone Kelly interpretive site, and so they're having a good time so far. So we wanted to be able to welcome them, and they've got a few gifts for us. So we're also honored to have with us the president of the Friends of the USS Billings, Ron Spence. I guess now slightly retired general manager of the Billings Hotel and Convention Center. Ron, I'm going to hand it over to you to make introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. We really appreciate the opportunity of having these men and women from the crew of the USS Billings here with us today. I'd like to introduce them, and then they'll come up. We have a presentation for the mayor, and then they also have a gift that they'd like to bestow on each member of you, or member of the council. And then, also we'd like to get a photo with you if you don't mind. So, if I could, like to introduce Commander Curtis Thomas II, commander of the USS Billings. Senior Chief Andrew Conover, he is the senior enlisted leader of the USS Billings. HM1 Troy Carter. HM1 Carter will be spending the day touring hospitals with Admiral Michael Case this week when the Admiral's here for the air show. We're very fortunate to have him here. He's the ship's corpsman. FC2 Daniel Kaufman, and the most important person on the ship, and that's CS3 Delene Hans. She is the culinary specialist that fixes the food for everybody. So, if you would all stand up, please. I appreciate it if you. Mr. Mayor, if you would, Commander Thomas has a proclamation he'd like to present to you.
That'd be just great, Commander.
Good evening. As Mr. Spence noted, Commander Curtis Thomas, hey, we want to, on behalf of the ship and the crew, we want to thank City of Billings for all of your dedicated service and support over the years. So thank you. And specifically, we want to present a certificate of appreciation. Know all ye by these presents that we, Billings, Montana, we thank you for your support of the United States Navy, given this 7th day of August, 2023. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Come on up and do sort of the photo op. I always feel short here for some reason. Great. And Commander, tell us a little bit. I understand that the Navy did an inspection of all of the ships in Naval Station Mayport, and the Billings got a certain honor about that. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that was?
Yes, sir. On a weekly basis, Navy does a preservation and seaworthy inspection of all the ships in Mayport. And we're proud to announce that last week we were named best ship on the waterfront. Wow. So, the sailors put a lot of pride and effort into making sure that the ship is seaworthy and presentable. And it's great to note it that other people recognize the hard work that's put in by the sailors and the crew. So, great recognition, and we plan to continue to keep the trophy on USS Billings.
Congratulations. The crew would like a picture. We would love a picture. So
we have a gift that we'd like to present to all the council members first, Mr. Mayor.
Why don't you come around, and as we line up here, you can get your gift, and then we'll snap a photo.
auditorium firm.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's
Middle block.
It's okay. I'm used to being called that.
Well, at least I got it right about you being the most important person on the ship.
Yes.
And I don't know how you want to intersperse the crew, but let's just kind of mix it up, okay?
In front of the camera.
Yeah.
We good? I got points for you guys. Oh, great. Everybody bunch in, I'll try and get the city of Billings sign in the background. There we go. And did I get everybody in the picture? I think we did. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. The crew will be here the rest of the week and also at the air show. Sold out.
I got the, yeah.
If you volunteer, you get free tickets.
They were 67% sold. So.
So if you want to volunteer, you get free tickets.
Oh, really? Okay.
Absolutely.
Are you in charge of volunteers?
Huh?
Are you in charge of the volunteers?
No, Jody Edwards.
Thanks, sir. Oh, yes, we'll, there, and, and Kendra. Let's ask Ed to give that to Kendra.
Good to see you.
All right, thank you, members of the crew, and thank you, council. It's a great opportunity and a great honor for us individually and for the city to have the crew with us. We'll move on then to the first item on our agenda, which is public comment. And so this is an opportunity for public comment on any of the items that are on our agenda tonight. We will have an opportunity for public comment on item number 1 and 2 later. But if you'd like to be heard on any of those items, especially if you're going to have to leave later, please come forward. So if you'd like to comment on items 1 or 2 at this time, especially if you have to leave, please come forward, or you can wait until we get to those items. And there's a copy of the agenda back there. First item is our unified work plan, and the second item is our Parks, Rec, and Trail Bond resolution. Is there any public comment on those items or items not on our agenda at this time? No one is coming forward, no one is online, so we'll close the initial public comment period and move on to our very first item, the 2024 Unified Planning Work Program. And Laura is working on that one. Pulling up the PowerPoint is there. We have a coin for you. And a cucumber. If the meeting goes late, Councilmembers Purington has faithfully, yeah, this will keep us going.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we're bringing forward to you is our annual UPWP, our Unified Planning Work Program. This is a program we bring to you every year about this time for our federal planning dollars that we use to staff the MPO and complete transportation planning projects. The MPO is for communities of 50,000 plus. We've been MPO for quite a while and have been handling these transportation planning dollars for quite a while. We adopt this work plan annually, and it goes through all the local governing bodies, starting with our technical advisory committee and ending up with our planning policy coordinating committee, which is made up of the city, county, planning board, and members of the MDT. There are 12 work elements in our work program that are staffed throughout our division, Since transportation planning is really involved in everything we do from subdivision to zoning, any land use, we can use a portion of those PL funds in our staffing for reimbursement. We ask for reimbursement quarterly, and there's a rate for reimbursement under each work element, which I'll show here in a minute. Something new this year is the addition of a new federal requirement that requires 2.5% of our planning funds to be used towards complete streets planning. This really won't be a stretch for us. Pretty much everything we do in our transportation planning studies and our long-range plans includes elements of complete streets like multimodal, sidewalks, transit, those elements. So, but we're actually being asked to call those out specifically as we go through our projects. Our funding sources have stayed pretty consistent this last year. We didn't see a huge change. You will notice, if you've been following along the years we've been doing the UPWP, is that we did have a slight reduction in PL funds we received this year. That's because of the inclusion of 2 new MPOs this year with Bozeman and Helena. With this new census information that came out in 2020, they surpassed the 50,000 mark. Therefore, they are becoming MPOs, which means the pot is getting divvied up a little bit smaller. However, we're not going to take a big hit on this. We're still going to be able to complete all our normal plans and studies and staffing as we do, and we still will have a little bit of contingency non-used funds that we will carry over. As you can see, what the planning department fees, these are fees generated from our zoning, subdivision, over-the-counter permitting. Yellowstone County, the same, zoning, subdivision. Yellowstone County, we have a planning mill that generates just about $600,000 for our staffing each year. And then with our federal PL funds, that gives us just about $2.5 million to work with. The UPWP runs with the federal fiscal year, so it begins on October 1st and ends through September. And again, all of our elements that we identify in this plan have to be related to transportation planning in some sort. This is the funding summary for this year, and you'll notice that we have a column for PL funding, which is our federal funding, and our local funding and the total cost. As you go down each one of those elements, it's tied to a different process that we complete in our office. And then you'll notice at work element 700, unprogrammed funds, that's what we're not going to be spending in federal funds and how much money in local we would save. It's not that this unprogrammed money goes away. We will see it wrapped into our next UPWP in 2 years. So it's not that we're not spending it, it's just not we're spending it this year. Table 2 is just a comparison of last year's PL to this year. A couple things to call out in element 301, our transportation plan. In last year in 23, fiscal year 23 is a little bit higher because we were updating our long-range transportation plan. And so that's a little bit higher. But overall, the funding has stayed fairly consistent through all the elements. And you can see the total at the bottom, the little bit of difference between the less PL funding. Again, this is just kind of going down. This is showing our funding percentages on how we split out the PL between that and local, what we are able to do. You'll notice in element 300, 301, 5, and 600, those are all 100% funded through our federal transportation dollars because those are 100% related to transportation planning. Everything else is a cost share with local funding, such as citizen involvement, community planning, zoning, and subdivision. They're all a percentage that's split out. Okay. This is our man months. This is how we break down staff's time in each element. You'll notice there's 11 months calculated here. The 12th month, it calculates for sick, vacation, personal time, that type of thing. So each staff is generating so many hours in each one of these elements yearly, and that's how we do our billing and calculate for our quarterly reimbursements. These are priorities from our 2023 UPWP to complete the update to our long-range transportation plan, which we have done now. We are in the process of completing the phase 2 to the Safe Routes to School study. One thing we did add is we added some transportation funds to update some of our long-range plans that are out there, specifically to the West End Plan update and to the Heights Neighborhood Plan update. Both of those have funding associated with those. And this year, although we had it in last year, we have started to update our bike pedestrian plan. Our 2024 projects is to complete the update to our bike ped plan. We're looking at completing a feasibility study for the 21st Street underpass to look at how we could possibly help the functionality of that underpass, especially since at this time there's no changes on the 27th Street Railroad corridor. This might be an opportunity to look at some options to help move traffic safely and better under that underpass. Complete the neighborhood plans with the transportation elements. And we also have in here corridor studies. That's kind of vague, and that's because we're working with Public Works, City of Billings Public Works, to really identify which corridors that could use some study, some of our arterial corridors that we could look at further. With that, I'm going to stop on the highway side. I'm going to turn it over to Rusty to talk a little bit about the transit, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions when we wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Mayor, Council, good evening. The transit side of the UPWP structured pretty similar as with the PL funds. Reimbursement does occur quarterly with those. Our funding is provided, however, under Section 5303 from the Federal Transit Administration. Our local match formula is a lot more simple. It's just a straight 80-20. As far as the 20% local, 80% federal. Local match is provided through transportation mills, primarily our advertising revenue and other applicable sources in that. As far as funding goes for Met Transit this year, the MPO, as Laura had mentioned, was seeing some changes to their federal apportionments due to Helena and Bozeman coming online. The transit operations within those two cities have not yet fully been designated as urbans. So we did see quite an increase to our planning dollars this year because of the increases to the bipartisan, from the bipartisan infrastructure law. There was a small amount of carryover that was also allocated forward. So we've actually got a pretty sizable allotment this year compared to past years. We're looking at that final number there at $386,275. So compared across, you see that that's a bit of a jump from even previous years as well. We do anticipate that we will see a rollback in that funding level for federal fiscal year 25, as that's when the state anticipates that they'll start pushing out some of these planning dollars to those two urban systems. So our priorities this year in our current program, we had a number of those. We had some required plan updates. That would be to our transit agency safety plan, disadvantaged business enterprise, and our asset management plans. We spent a significant portion of our time continuing to develop and implement policy and practices of sport training and safety. We actually have a few new pieces of that that'll be implemented here shortly with the simulator arriving probably next week. Is what we're on track for, and then completing or continuing to build out some of those training requirements within the program to continue to meet the federal requirements. We've also spent a lot of time, it's consumed my life lately, on implementation activities for our transit development plan. That would be that route overhaul and rollout that we're shooting for here in October. In conjunction with that, we did complete our bus stop master plan, including designating locations for all of those bus stops in the system. To note, we have around 465 unique bus stop locations now identified in that our staff is currently hard at work getting signed and all the amenities up and running for those. And then we've done some significant facility-related capital and planning and environmental review and preparation for execution of that federal grant we received in 2021 for improvements to the primary Met facility. There it goes. As far as 2024 goes, of course, we'll be doing our ongoing capital and equipment planning and updates. The big thing I want to call out here, since we do have a significant higher amount of planning dollars this year, and Met is in a pretty good good spot right now as far as our overall funding goes. COVID did help us out quite a bit in that regard, as well as the competitive funding that we've been fortunate enough to receive in the past couple of years. So With Met at the good spot that it's in now, we want to really focus on putting together a sustainability study for Met Transit to really help guide us, or at least give us some input onto where we should go into the future as far as ensuring that we're able to sustain the current pace of transit and keep up with the growth in the area. So that'll look at a number of different funding options, including, I have governance called out up there, but that's really just looking at different methods that we can use to continue to fund transit going forward in more innovative ways than we have in the past. So we did specifically set aside about $150,000 in that planning grant specifically to go out and probably request a consultant group to come in and help us really put together a long-term outlook for what transit's going to be into the future. The other big thing that we're undertaking this year is assessing our paratransit eligibility processes for improvements. Really with that, as many of you know, across the state, we've experienced a number of closures of facilities and homes in small communities, which has just proved to drive a lot of individuals who are depending on those services into the urban area. Because of that, we've seen a significant increase in the amount of applications that we're receiving for paratransit services, and we want to ensure that we're able to keep up with that, but also that we're providing services to people who really should be eligible for that service. Right now, we rely solely upon medical providers to give us the documentation, and as we know, they're all stretched thin as well. So we want to make sure that we're giving that eligibility process all due consideration. Following the rollout of our new system, we also want to look at an analysis of fare and service utilization, just to make sure that we're staying competitive in that regard and making sure that we are funding the system appropriately with the portion of fares that we can. And then finally, we really want to look at development or assessment of a solution to centralize our public-facing technology solutions. As many of you know, we have multiple smartphone applications, we have multiple different forms of technology that the customers can utilize, but they're a little fragmented right now, so we'd like to get those all under one umbrella. And with that, I guess we're open to any questions.
Okay, very good. Thank you for your presentation. I'll just start off with a question that would kind of be for both of you, and that's the future impact of the addition of Bozeman and Helena. Do we expect the overall pie to also get proportionally larger because they're now in the picture, or are we simply going to get proportionally less? And if it's proportionally less, is it just done based on population? And the combined population of those two cities is probably about 100,000, about the same as Billings and about the same as Missoula. So instead of getting half for simple numbers, we'd be getting 1/3 of the total. So if you can comment on that.
Right, Mayor, Council. I think that's something we'll have to wait and see for sure. I don't anticipate that we'll see reduced funding any more than what is kind of consistent with this UPWP. I believe the transportation bill will continually be funded, and I think we'll see more money coming in. So I don't think we're going to see less than we have right now. But I think it could be an unknown until we get into maybe next year, and Bozeman and Helena are just now starting the process of getting their paperwork in place. I don't anticipate them actually be fully functional as an MPO for at least probably another year. But I guess we'll see when we get the next PL funding, unless you know something different than I do.
As far as transit goes, the planning dollars, we're anticipating we'll see a little bit of a reduction in. As far as our other federal grants that are coming through, those are generally based off of a nationwide apportionment. So while nationwide or Montana-wise, we gained urbanized areas, there was also areas that stepped back from being qualified as an urban. Overall, apportionments for operating funds are really based on population and population density, so we don't really anticipate any decrease, if any decrease at all, on the operational side. So.
Okay, well, stay tuned. Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a couple of questions, Rusty. All the planning in the world is great, but if we don't have the staff to carry it out, can you tell us about the staffing issues with, expansion of the bus services? Or
We're doing a lot better in that regard now. We have 3 current vacancies. We have a couple candidates in the pipeline. However, here within the last month, we've been able to fill a number of those open vacancies. So the long haul on that now is just getting all the training done, getting them through the training programs. A few of them do have CDLs, so that makes it a little bit faster of a training process, but generally the individuals coming in without a CDL, it's anywhere from about 2 to 3 months to get them fully up and running. But we are starting to see a little bit of an increase in the applications and the uptick on that side.
One more question. I had a constituent call and say, does the city own the benches at the bus stops? And I said, yes, we do. Can you talk about how we're doing money-wise with those?
Yeah, we're, so actually, I discussed with Director Roach, we opted to move that advertising position that we have full-time into transit to really focus on the program. The program's still maintaining the pace that we were at. We're generating about 220-ish thousand per year, and that's really just focusing on benches right now. So bringing this individual in, we really want to grow out that bus advertising portion of it too and make sure we're leveraging all of our assets in it. So it's still, yeah, it's still definitely continuing to generate a good amount of revenue for us.
Thank you. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just had a question for, about the sustainability. What are some of the goals? You're looking to do a sustainability study for Met. What are some of the issues or some of the goals that you want to achieve or establish in order to have better sustainability? Thank you.
Really, I guess the big question in that would be continued funding for transit at a level that supports the growing urbanized area. Met Transit, we're still running on the same, sorry, I've got a bug buzzing me here. We're running on the same 10 mills that were authorized originally back in 1978. So we have found, different ways, whether it be from the advertising revenue or from trying to generate more off of parking and those types of things to increase the revenue that we have available to continue to meet the growing demand here. But really we want to make sure that we're on a sustainable path and what steps that we need to take in order to make sure the service doesn't stagnate, doesn't fall into just being a very niche system that really doesn't serve the community. We've done a lot of work in the past 5 years to try and advance Met from where it had been previously, kind of in that same vein. So that's really our primary ask in that, is that we want somebody to come in and help guide us on that. It's easy for us to sit back and look at it just through our own, very limited viewpoint that we've had in the experience here, but we want to make sure that we're looking at the entire picture. That's why we'd like to bring a consultant in to really help assess that situation.
Thank you. Councilmember Purington, Councilmember Gulick?
Just a quick question, Rusty, on the CDLs.
Yes.
I think it was during COVID that the state was authorizing sort of a fast track on those. Is this 2 to 3 months still within that fast tracking or not?
Not really. We found, we have developed a relationship with the local office so we can get some of these individuals in for testing. We are looking at different opportunities for potentially becoming our own testing site. The DOJ would still have to handle the written test, but we could potentially be authorized for driving tests as well. So we are exploring that path right now, and hopefully we'll get some movement on it. We've had that discussion ongoing for about 6 months now, but yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Gulick?
Also for Rusty, on related subject, or just related entirely, actually. So with the CDLs, I know you were having problems finding candidates who already had that, and now you have a training program that they don't need to enter with that. So it sounds like it's working.
Yeah, it is. We are set up as an entry-level driver training site now with the Federal Motor Carriers Services Administration. So we are meeting all those requirements for getting someone in and able to be licensed then, as far as that hasn't had a CDL before or needs to add an additional endorsement or so to operate our vehicles. So it's working quite well for us at this point. So.
Good job at recognizing the problem and figuring out a solution, and it's working. That's great. Thank you.
Great. Other questions for Laura or Councilmember Denise?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to thank you for having the 21st Street project in there, and the study starting to move forward in that. So can you speak a little bit as far as how long that will take and when we can expect some results on that?
Well, as stated, the council member, Nice, Mayor, Council, the new fiscal year for our transportation planning dollar starts October 1st. So we have a lot of long-range plans and projects coming up in this next year or two between the state legislature and as well as our 2 neighborhood plans. So we'll look at our scheduling and we'll get that on. We definitely want to get it started so we can spend a good chunk of money and get that project going. So that might be a good one to start maybe this winter And so we can get a consultant on board to start doing that exploration and work on that.
Great, thank you. I look forward to seeing that.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions? All right, thank you. We'll have public comment and on this item. So if anybody would like to comment on the 2024 Unified Planning Work Program and the presentation you just heard, please come to the podium. Is there any public comment on item number 1? No one is coming forward. We'll close that. Council, anything else on item number 1 before we call it a wrap and move to item number 2? Chris.
One piece I wanted, sorry, Mayor, Council, to circle back on Councilmember Boyette's question. So Rusty, his team's work, the bottom line is on the program for the benches, that's gone from roughly $120,000 in revenue to about double that. So definitely, at least in these first few years, it's been a smart move to bring it in-house versus what we're receiving before. And those are dollars that are covered through advertisement versus from our taxpayers. So it's a good thing. So thank you, Rusty, and your team and for that work.
Very good. Thanks for pointing that out, Chris. Okay, if there's nothing else, we will move on to item number 2, the Parks and Rec and Trail Bond Resolution. I don't know if there's a copy of the proposed resolution or Councilmember Rupsis's email from Saturday. So council members, any member of the public who might be listening, the latest version of the resolution was circulated by Councilmember Rupsis on Saturday at 7:09 a.m. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you'll definitely will want to do that. I did have some conversation with Councilmember Rupsis about how we want to proceed through this. I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Rupsis to make his suggestion. I don't think that there is a staff presentation per se, but our Parks Director, Director Pig is with us, as well as City Administration. I think the goal is to kind of move through the 4 elements in the proposed resolution in order, have some discussion, engage staff. We have some stakeholders in the audience, it looks like, as well. And then once we've had that discussion, we can move on to the next one. So that's the only thing I have in the way of preliminaries. I'm going to turn over to Councilmember Rupsis to make his suggestions how we move through item number 2. Councilmember Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I think what you suggested was fine. If everybody is okay with that, we can just go section by section and work through this. I really prefer not to read it word for word. It's a lot, but just really to highlight the key points and also the changes that we made over the last few weeks since we last talked about this last month. We had a kind of a small working group, council members Purinton, Owen, Shaw, and the mayor. We kind of hammered through this, had some good discussion, updated this document a lot based on that. I updated this document based on Councilmember Owen's previously submitted comments and have resubmitted it to you all again. I do apologize for getting it out so late. We had a second meeting scheduled for Friday, and there were a lot of scheduling conflicts that didn't happen, and I also had some family issues. So apologize for getting that out to you not until Saturday morning, and I apologize to Gina. The updates came out after the agenda was posted. For the most part, they're not too significantly different than what was posted, but there have been, and I'll point those changes out as we go. Mayor, if that's okay, did you want to have any other preliminaries, or should we get started?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. The only thing I should have mentioned is for any members of the public who might be watching, city council emails that go to the general council email address are posted on the city's website. So you can always go and find those in this particular document. I don't think it's been added to our packet. Probably. So if somebody wants it, contact one of your council members. We'll be sure to email it to you. This is only a work session, so we will not be making any binding decisions in any way, perhaps giving some direction to staff. The big picture here, as I recall, is pursuant to Councilmember Rupsis's initiative, staff has been directed to put together some form of this document into a draft resolution before the end of August. And so that's where we're at procedurally. Again, no final decisions will be made here tonight, But members of the public, if you're looking for what we're going to be talking about tonight, Councilmember Ripsis's email to the City Council from Saturday, August 5th at 7:09 a.m. And you can see it here as we go through it. There is both in that email the red line version showing changes from the version before that, and also a clean version. So before we jump into the first section, general comments from council members. Councilmember Tricky.
So the version that is in the agenda is different than the one in the email?
Yes, slightly. For the first three sections, it's slightly different. The fourth section had been rewritten, but most of the content is the same. We'll just talk a little bit about the approach has been changed just a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Then Councilmember Neese or other council members in the category of sort of general comments, we'll call it.
Yeah, just quick clarification. So after tonight, we work through this document, it goes to staff. Staff turns it into a resolution. Will we say that resolution at a work session first before it comes to us, or will it be at a business session to just approve as staff presented?
I'm going to turn it over to our city administrator. Tell us a little bit more about August scheduling on this topic.
It'll be refined based on what happens tonight. I mean, if on one bookend extreme, if you guys come together on what you expect to approve, then I would anticipate putting on a regular meeting for your approval. If you're still a long ways from that, then I'd put it on another work session and continue to plow our way through it.
So we will have one more work session in 14 days, which would be the 21st, August 21st, and then 7 days after that would be the 28th. So there, depending on when we wanted to approve it, there would be potentially another work session.
Sorry, Mayor, the last piece I'll add, it was deliberate that we didn't add anything to tonight's agenda. There were some other items that we could have put, and actually moved something last week that wasn't urgent, knowing the time sensitivity of this for you and us to focus on delivering. We've got several hours tonight to work through this, so it really is at the pace that you want to take it.
Okay, well, we'll press ahead then. And we'll move on to the general project overview section. And again, I don't know if everybody has hard copies of this document, or you can look online. Councilmember Ripsis, I think everybody appreciates your comment that we not read every sentence, but we don't want to miss important things too. So I think you had a little bit of an introduction for each section to highlight some of the most important changes and or other key points. So I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll just kick it back to the council members for questions and comments, if that works for you.
Perfect.
And again, we do have some stakeholders in the audience, and if they start jumping up and down or waving their hands, if it's okay with council, we might ask them to, or if any of the council members have questions for people in the audience, feel free to pose those as well. So, Councilmember Ripsis. All
right, thank you, Mayor. Starting with the general project overview, this section really just kind of sets up what we're doing and why we're doing it. The general goal of this entire project is to improve the health and safety of our community through increased recreational opportunities for all citizens. And a month ago when we were talking about this, there were a couple comments about, we should include in here that the goal is to build a rec center. And I'd really kind of question that. I didn't make that update. The goal here is not to do any one particular project. The goal is to do a package of projects that benefit the community, and every one of these projects has been in and out over the months as we've talked about these things. So what I really do is I just kind of change that focus a little bit, just to say what we were focused on as we decided which projects should be in this package or not. And again, we're replacing existing deteriorating facilities, we're completing partially completed projects, and we're leveraging grants and pledges and other revenue and capital opportunities that are out there. The projects in scope on this budget are there listed in two. The only changes I've made here is to specifically say which projects are GO, general obligation bonds, and which projects have portions of their budgets coming from other sources. The big one here being the rec center, $25 million coming from Sabura, the TIF district, and $85 million from GO bonds. And this will be a recurring theme as we go through this. There was a lot of concern raised by council members Owen and Purinton and others that the rec center may go over budget and take budget away from other projects. And everybody wants to make perfectly clear that that should not happen. And we have some stakeholders tonight that can speak to that, but the general approach is if the rec center, budget comes in higher than what has been estimated, what has been very conservatively estimated by Dusty Eden through the master planning process, the gap would be closed through value engineering, right sizing, and additional private fundraising, not from additional share of those GO bonds. The other thing that's interesting to note here are the trail projects, Stagecoach Trail out of that $5+ million, getting $4.7 million from the Transportation Alternative Program federal grant, and $100,000 from Billings TrailNet. And then the other trails projects also tapping into that, tapping into those TAP grants to the tune of over $1 million and an additional $325,000 in fundraising from Billings TrailNet. Moving on to number 3, wanted to be very specific about, well, as specific as we could be at this point, how this bond cost, how bonds will be issued and the cost will impact taxpayers over the years. We do not have the capacity or really ability to issue all bonds from day one. So we expect that there'll be at least 3 tranches over a minimum of 3 years to get through all these projects. And of course, once we issue the bonds, we have to do the construction on those projects within, I think it's 2 years. So we don't want to issue more bonds than we can use in budget over those couple years. So here we are saying that at least 3 tranches in over a minimum of 3 years. And we expect the first tranche to be no more than a third of the total possible bonding authority. So in the realm of maybe $40 million, $45 million, somewhere in there, with the understanding that as of this day right now, and we'll talk about this more in one of the other sections, we just don't know exactly what's going to be in that first round of projects. But we do want to give people an assurance that the cost is not, if we say it's going to be $150 a year for the median taxpayer, that's going to ramp up over 3, 5+ years. It's not going to all hit in year 1. Number 4 here, issuance of debts must be reviewed by the Budget and Finance Committee. This is a section that was, I apologize if this was inappropriate, but copied word from Councilmember Owen's email. I think it's a good point, right? We want to have the Budget and Finance Committee review any bonds that we're ready to issue, the projects that are going to be paid for out of those bonds, timelines, those types of things, and then coming to council for our approval. It's a lot of part of standard practice, but I think it's good to call that out there in section 4, or number 4. Number 5, Park District 1, as we know, will be sunset. This hasn't changed at all. We made a vote during the budget session to not assess Park District 1 anymore. It's going to be sunset, and that's revenue neutral in FY24. And finally, this last point 6 in this section, the bonds here cover just the capital construction costs. We know that there will be ongoing increased operation and maintenance costs to maintain these parks and facilities. It doesn't do anything to build them if we're not going to maintain them ongoing. However, it doesn't make sense to do the levy first before the community says we want to make these investments. And so we know that we will have to have a levy at some point in the future after these construction projects are complete. The original version that was submitted as part of the initiative said we expect that to be in about 5 years. And to Councilmember Owen's points, predictions are hard, especially about the future. So we don't want to lock ourselves into 5 years. The most we can say at this point is that we do expect to do a levy after the construction is complete. And that, during our council retreat, we all talked about the need to have an ongoing incremental development fund so that we could do small projects around the community for new development and keep up with these things over time as opposed to letting them backlog again for another 30 or 40 years. So that's the general overview section. Happy to take any questions or however you want us to proceed from here. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Ripsis. I have one about in paragraph 4, and I think Councilmember Joy also had a question. I don't think I'm acting contrary to the intent here, but I just want to get some clarification. The first sentence says, all issuance of debt, whether GO or Suburra, must be reviewed by the Budget and Finance Committee and recommended to council for approval. My only concern is, I guess I'm assuming we're not intending to give the Budget and Finance Committee veto power. And so if it has to recommend it, and they choose not to recommend something, are we without power to go contrary to that? I don't think that's anybody's intent, right? So I guess assuming that's the case, so if that is the case, then I would say maybe we could adjust that language, say something like must be reviewed by the Business and Finance Committee, just prior to, and get rid of and recommended to council for approval prior to council consideration. Or if it's clear that we want the recommendation, we can say reviewed by the Budget and Finance Committee for its recommendation prior to council consideration. But that's my only question, is not, or making it clear it's not some veto, so-called veto power. And if that was initiated by Councilmember Owen, I'll ask for her comment.
I think if we modify the language to say that they either, essentially, Mayor, what you were saying, essentially provide a recommendation to council, whether that's approval or disapproval, right? But I think either recommendation could be provided consistent with what I intended here.
Okay, so we'll leave that to Gina for the exact language, but that'd be the concept. Councilmember Joy had a question or comment?
Thank you. That was exactly my question, and I just wanted it to be consistent with our resolution that created the committees. The resolution that created the committees said a recommendation. It doesn't give a veto power over things brought forward to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments, Councilmember, on this section, Councilmember Tricky.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one thing that I think it would be nice to do is in paragraph 6, make it clear that we are talking about operations and maintenance in the language about a future levy, but I think it also should be in there that those funds may come out of the general fund too. It is not a requirement that an additional levy for maintenance and operations be done in order to make this work. Does that make sense?
And is there, yes, or is there any objection to that? Or how would you adjust the language? Change will be needed to may be needed, or something else, or?
I mean, we struck out the general fund, and I wouldn't have struck it out. It is certainly expected in the immediate future that these funds will come from the general fund, but a future levy for parks, maintenance, and operation may be needed once all the projects are done or completed.
Yeah, I think we can work that back in, and I don't think anybody would object that in the future, if we do have excess capacity in the general fund, that we wouldn't probably run a levy. I don't think anybody would have an objection to that.
Okay, Councilmember Owen?
When I had sent my email to council, I had sort of done a footnote to Andy, and I didn't get a response, so maybe it means I'm right, but I'm suspect that I am. I have a belief that if we were to issue bonds, let's say in January 24, that the first bond payment is not due till January 25. But I don't know if that's true or not. That's your understanding as well. Okay, so I think what I want to make sure that we're doing is not raising taxes in fiscal year 24, and I think that's where we're at, correct? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. according to Andy, I get that same information. So FY '24, there'll be no impact to taxpayers.
Does that, I'm sorry,
ahead.
if I could, does that, as far as, I guess, Chris, I don't know if you have a thought on this, if bonds are issued, even if payment is due in January 25, let's just say, for the sake of argument, we issue January 24, payment is due, first debt service payment due January 25, are we certain then that all of that gets levied on the November bill, not, and that we don't start it on the April bill? Go ahead.
According to Andy's prior direction, we have 2 payments per year.
Okay.
So one would be January, one would be July, presumably, and so that we would have both payments.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any other sections on general project overview section? Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. And I think I've talked about this before, because one of the things we did in Council Rock Park was make sure that the master plan included what the additional costs for operations and maintenance were, so FTEs. They don't know the exact dollar amounts. So when we talk about this in paragraph 6, is there any indication, I know it's difficult to know, but is there any indication on all these different master plans that we have, what the additional FTEs are going to be, it's going to cost the city to run when it's completed?
Thank you, Councilmember Neese. Yes, and in fact, the Parks Department, I believe, included that in their presentation last month. I think the number was 1.9 million, somewhere around there. But they had calculated all those things out based on all the improvements, and of course, they wouldn't all be required on day one. But we do have, as you know, some cap in the general fund availability, so we can grow into those things over time.
I'm sorry, Chris, you want to comment on that?
Actually, not specific to that, but to this section. So I just wanted to verify, and actually, my comment has to do with this last bullet 6, and that is just to be clear, and Andy and I are texting, so, you know, you always can, you could lose something in translation, but my question to him was this, because the first sentence is, the bonds cover capital construction cost only. Get the intent. They also, though, will be covering finance cost. I mean, there are significant finance charges related to borrowing this kind of money. So I just want to be clear that it is not only construction, that there are other costs tied only to the projects and the borrowing for the projects, but.
Good point. And what paragraph was that?
That is item 6 under.
Yes, construction and financing.
Yep, yeah, capital construction and finance costs. Yep.
Good catch. Okay, anything else on this first section before we move on to the second section? Okay, we'll go then to the second section, financial commitments. Of course, this involves a lot of our stakeholders, third parties, and funding plans. So turn it over to Councilmember Ripsis to do similarly, walk us through kind of major points and important changes.
Thank you, Mayor. So again, this financial commitment section talks a lot about how we expect the commitments that our partners have made, fundraising opportunities, revenue opportunities, all those kinds of things, to help defray some of the costs that are going to taxpayers. So walking through these, on the first one, we've talked about our $6 million capital campaign. We'll also have another $6 million that we'll be seeking in grants from foundations, agencies, and otherwise. To go along with that, of course, nobody will want to issue a grant prior to the bonds actually passing, and knowing that we're going to do these projects. So we expect those things to come a little further. The capital campaign is underway now and making good progress already. We'll be hearing some news about that soon and probably in regular chunks throughout this fall. One of the things I wanted to point out here was the change in the first section. As Councilmember Owen pointed out, it's much better not to issue the debt in the first place than to issue the debt and have to pay the carrying cost of that debt. So wanted to be clear that the funds raised from the capital campaign could be used to either reduce the size of the bond that had to be issued, or to reduce the ongoing debt service that was levied from taxpayers. We need to do either one of those. This PAR Montana grant, for example, up to $2 million. That'll be paid out over 10 years. So it's not going to be that we won't have $2 million up front to decrease the bond costs, but we will be able to have revenue throughout 10 years to help reduce the annual debt levy from the taxpayers. The second bullet there, we had a lot of discussion about, which projects should be included in here or not, and why were some and not others. I felt that the best move here was just to change this so that until that $6 million capital campaign is complete, no project will begin construction at all. And again, we believe that this capital campaign is achievable and doable, and we've got a lot of energy and excitement behind it, so we don't expect this to be an issue, but certainly we'll hold back on any construction until our partners that have committed to raising these funds hit their target. Number 4, call that out. This is a new one, again, on Councilmember Owen's suggestion. Any donations that were received prior to July 10th, which was the date that we voted to put the bond resolution out to the voters, if you had any donations prior to that, they wouldn't count as part of that $6 million capital campaign. We've confirmed that with our partners. That's their understanding as well. This primarily affects 3 different projects. Colson Park has a number of fundraising that has already been done by Big Sky Economic Development, and especially as a match to the Exxon oil settlement. We have some funds that have been raised for Cottonwood Park, a small amount, I think about $50,000. And Landon's Legacy, of course, has continued to raise funds for the playground out there at Poly Vista Park. And so those funds would be available as well. What we've said here is that, they're not going to affect that capital campaign, but what we could do is we could use them to increase the project budgets. We know that every project on this list has already been kind of scaled back or scrimped, and we've had to already, we know that the budgets that we're issuing is not going to let us do everything under the sun, and we're not going to be able to gold plate these projects to any degree, and so these few projects that already had some capital raised prior to us even putting this out to the voters should be able to use those funds for increasing their budgets. There were not a lot of additional changes then until we get down to number 9, and talking about the ice and the aquatics communities and their commitment to help defray some of the costs. Really what we wanted to do here was just call out that the ice community is committed to liquidating Centennial Ice Arena and any assets they use there, and donating those funds to help with the construction costs. These things won't come into, this liquidation won't be done until the recreation center already opens up, right? So we have to be able to use those funds not to avoid debt, but they'll have to be used to help decrease the debt service levy that we asked taxpayers for. Since our July 10th meeting, where we put this on the ballot, number 12, the TBID has, their board met on July 13th. They worked through their own process to make their commitment. So we updated that language in number 12 to what you see there. The TBID has conditionally agreed to provide funding for promotional, marketing, administrative, and operational expenses of up to $800,000 per year for a period of 10 years. This will defray the operating deficit of the recreation center. There is a word there that we've received a lot of comments on, the conditionally agreed. The idea here is that between now and the election, the TBID and the city, they're already working on this, will define a memorandum of understanding exactly how this will happen. And so that conditionally really just means that it's conditioned upon the MOU actually being completed. Again, they're already working on that. Appreciate their efforts there. And we have the Partners for Parks raising $25,000 a year to help with scholarships and financial accessibility for households. And we do think that this is important, number 14 here, it was part of the comprehensive plan, the 2017 comp plan for the department, that we need to have adopt a park and adopt a trail programs. And this can help defray some of the operational costs to taxpayers, whether that's through fundraising or for actual, hands-on projects helping with maintenance and operations in the parks. So that was the last thing we called out there. And with that, we'll open up for questions and comments. Thank you.
Very good, Councilor Rupsis. I'll again kick us off on the issue of Centennial Ice Arena, so 9A, that new language. I guess it's my assumption, but correct me if I'm wrong, that the proceeds from the sale of Centennial Ice Arena would be counted as part of the capital campaign $6 million target number. And A, is that true? And B, about how much would we anticipate that raising? And I'm assuming that includes the real property, not just some Coke machines in the corner or something like that, but it's the facility and the land, et cetera.
So actually, this won't happen for several years down the road until the recreation center is actually completed. So no, this won't affect the capital campaign. We have no idea really what that's going to be. The county owns the land that it sits on. The building, I don't think, is going to be much value to anybody. There will be equipment and other things within the building that could sell popcorn machines and those types of things. It's not going to be a huge amount of money, but they do own those things, and they're willing to donate those funds to help with the construction costs.
Okay, but the county owns the real estate.
Yes.
Have we had any discussion with the county about contributing the proceeds from the sale of that property at some point? It may be premature, obviously, but I could see that would be a great use of those proceeds. Of course, I'm a little biased in that. But, okay, other questions? Councilmember Purington?
Really, they're just kind of minor. Tom, in number 1, you said the capital campaign and grant funds could be used, but in the here you say will be used. So those are two different dynamics. So which is it? Number 1, in the second sentence, the capital campaign and grant funds could be used to reduce the amount, is what you verbally said, but on here it says will be used. Those are two different dynamics. Which one do you think?
I'm sorry, where does it say could be used?
You said it.
Oh, I
Whenever
said
you-
it.
Yeah, you said it when you read through this.
I'm sorry, please just credit that to my imprecise
So
speaking abilities.
it is will.
Yes.
Okay, so continue on, Mr. Mayor. Let me
Go ahead.
see where the other one was. Let's see, it was in, where was that? Oh, I think it was about the ICE community. Okay, but some of my questions were, I know what it was. In number 14, the adopt a park, adopt a trail to help offset all parks and trails. It's not just these that are in this bond. So maybe all could be inserted there, because that would make a difference.
Hey, could you repeat that paragraph number?
You bet. It is 14, and it's at the very beginning of the sentence, adopt a park, adopt a trail programs to help offset parks and trail maintenance costs. They're not just in the ones that are in this bond. They're for all of the parks and all of the trails. So
Okay.
to insert that. So I will just say that I had met with Tom briefly, I don't know, Thursday or Friday, and I did have some concerns regarding the capital campaign and the $6 million and whatever. And I don't know if this is we'll probably do it under public comment, but I visited with Steve Arviskow just right before the meeting, and he was explaining, Big Sky, the EDA and the EDC, how they're managing, if you will, how they're going to pay, or what they're going to pay and how they're going to pay. So if it would be better at the end to do that, but since we're in the financial commitment, I don't know if you want to have him explain it now or
I'll leave
later.
that up to you. If you'd like him, that'd be
Well,
great.
I just think it was very telling to me. I thought, Steve, I didn't
It
understand
seems like
that.
this would be a good time.
Okay, yeah, so Steve, if you wouldn't mind just in, in your short version, how you did that, how you said that.
Thank you, members of council. Steve Arviscow, Big Sky Economic Development. I'm not known for short versions.
Yeah, I realize that. You're on the clock.
I will do my best.
Time him, Denise.
And I'm not sure the context of the section you're dealing with, but what we spoke about today was the role of our organization in this whole effort. And we're kind of a public-private partnership, so we have the Economic Development Authority, which is quasi-governmental, created by Montana statute, and then the county commissioners. Like the city, that structure is restricted in what it can or cannot do relative to an item in front of the voters. And so our job as an EDA will be to help educate the community on the facts related to this project. Our goal would be to work very closely with the city parks, with Victoria, your public information officer, add whatever information would be factual and important for citizens to be understanding as part of that process. On the EDC side, that's a not-for-profit corporation, different set of rules and standards. And so that board operates independent of the other board. But frankly, when we looked at this project, both boards said, no, this is a top priority for us. And it has been for a number of years, frankly, to find a comprehensive way to fund our parks and trails development in the community. What I had mentioned to Councilwoman Parrington is that our individual board members can make whatever decision they want to make on either board, whether they're going to contribute financially to the campaign for purposes of encouraging the vote or to the capital campaign, that's all on them. Our financial contribution as an organization is specific to the construction of the parks components of this bond issue. We're not contributing resources to the election go vote campaign. And I think that distinction, Pam, was important to you in our dialogue.
And so just a follow-up.
Go ahead.
So, it is on. So, whenever you're talking about the capital campaign, your portion of it in the EDC, it is for construction of the whole bond issue, whether it's the recreation center and or parks and trails. It's for all of those.
Yeah, and we made the pledge that we discussed making was toward continued investment in Colson Park, because under these provisions, you can designate your resources. And we'd already made a financial commitment and secured other grants, so we wanted to keep that process going.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything for Steve before we let him sit down? Thank you very much. Okay, other questions, Councilor Browan and Councilor Bernice?
Well, I see our friends from the T-bid here, so I think maybe this is an opportune time to get an update and understand where we stand. I have a few questions about the T-bid funding commitment as well, so.
George, Steve, whoever, or both of you. And Steve, if you would introduce yourself for the public.
Steve Warlick, with the Billings T-bid. I own the clock tower and Stellas.
You sell beds and pillows.
I put butts in beds and butts in seats, so that's what I do.
It's my understanding the T-bid board has now voted.
The T-bid board has voted as of July 13th. What we did is we agreed to fund up to $800,000, and I think the way we've worded it is administrative, promotion, marketing, and costs from there. The key element will be coming in the memorandum of understanding. How are those funds paid out? At what particular time? Does it happen monthly? Does it happen quarterly? Whatever from that standpoint. So the devil will be in the details with the MOU, which we've started on.
Did you, though, take action on the extension of your district, or is that a future vote?
No, that will be a future vote. We understand that we have to do that. What we will do is next year, we will put forth the resolution to increase the T-bid fee $2 automatically. And then from there, when the T-bid sunsets, we will actually, the year before it sunsets, we will go ahead and put out for a new T-bid. Last time we did the T-bid, we had an over 80% sign on for the resolution, and we stopped garnering signatures at that particular time.
I know this is going to ask you a little bit to peek into a crystal ball, but there had to be, my understanding at least, is some sort of behind-the-scenes assessment to understand the TBID's authority to enter into this kind of relationship. So where do you think we stand in terms of pushing the limits of statutory authority, being, sort of squarely within what the statute conceives, maybe on the bleeding edge of pushing it a little? How comfortable are you that you can do this?
Well, Gina could probably talk to that a little bit better. We had a meeting with Gina and Jeff Hunnis, who's the T-bid attorney, who's done probably 12 of the T-bids throughout the state. We're very comfortable that it does meet the definition, if you look at the statute, of promoting, marketing, and selling the community. And that's also, quite honestly, why in the resolution that Councilman Rupes put forth, that we put the terms in there of marketing, promotion, and operational types of items down there. We don't want it to go. We can't, quite honestly, by law, use it to do for construction or from infrastructure from that standpoint.
I guess I'm more concerned about your ability to just straight up subsidize operations, because I know that the TBID often does underwrite events.
Right.
But ongoing operations, I'm just curious if you feel like that's square.
I'm sorry, Councilman.
No, you're fine.
I think when you look at it and you say, okay, hey, we take all the promotion, we pay all the marketing dollars, and from that standpoint, that's a sizable amount of dollars that are not being funded by the facility at that particular time. And that's why we've worded it, Councilman Rupes has worded it the way it has been. And Gina, if you want to, you're more than welcome to provide some insight from our meetings that we've had.
Thank you. Mayor, Councilmember Owen, I did spend a bit of time researching this issue because I understand your concern, and at the beginning I shared that concern, but after having reviewed the statutes and our current resolution, I do think our current resolution will need to be amended slightly, the resolution that creates the TBID in order to use that money. If it were to be used before the 2 years before a new TBID is required, then the current resolution may need some slight amendments. But the authority, I am comfortable, I do believe that the authority under the law, under the current statutes, as well as the city of Billings being a self-governing entity, I am comfortable with that, and I think that we have the authority to do that.
Mayor, I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but I want to make sure I don't want us to be in a situation where we are looking at a purely operational shortfall, let's say of $500,000, and we're over here having to spend $800,000 on promotion marketing, right? Because it's clear to me that a TBID can do promotion and marketing. That is clear. But I don't want us to have a weird budgetary issue where the city's still having to come in and subsidize operations because these dollars can't be used actually to just straight up cover operational costs. So that's what I'm trying to understand is actually, I think colloquially we say the TBID's going to underwrite the operational deficit, but I'm not sure that that's actually allowable, and I just want you to tell me if it is.
I think when you look closer at the purpose of the statutory section, which talks about the purpose of these districts, having one or more of the purposes and powers provided in this part that will serve a public use, promote the health, safety, prosperity, security, and general welfare of the inhabitants of the district and of the people of the state, be of special benefit to the property within the boundaries of the district, or aid in tourism, promotion, and marketing within the district. I think that is a broad enough category that as long as it's defined in the resolution what the intent is, then I think that is broad enough, that the purpose of those districts is broad enough to allow for, to avoid the concern that you have that there's going to be this hugely skewed budget.
Councilman, let me give you an example. So currently with the TBID, it's Visit Billings, which is comprised of the CVB and the TBID. So we have an accountant. So you could argue that is operational costs, which it is, but it's done to support the marketing and advertising and promotion of the entity. So when we look at it, it's not only the marketing promotional dollars, it's those support systems that go to pay for those items. So that's why we feel, and I think the attorney has felt, and one of our biggest concern was whether or not we could make that commitment. And so we feel very confident that we can.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And Gina, just for anybody who might be listening, the statute that defines the T-bids scope of authority that you were quoting from was what? Can you just give us that citation?
The section I was reading is the purpose statute, which is 7-12-1102.
7-12-1102.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, anything else for Steve before we let him sit down? And then we'll go to Councilmember Bernice. Nope, don't see anything. So, Steve, thank you very much. Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to express, I actually have a lot of concerns as what Councilmember Owen expressed. And my concern is over that is we've seen at the state legislature, we push the boundaries of the state law and the legislators come back and correct that. So I did have a question for Steve regarding that. So Steve, if the legislature were to come back and limit these laws some, and I don't want to get into what ifs kind of scenarios, but if you're right now we're good, your T-bid's in existence for what, two or three more years, is that right?
27, yes.
27, okay. So I think Gina said we have to make some modifications to the resolution before we spend some of the money, but if the state changes their requirements and tighten it up a little bit as far as what they can be used, once the document signed, the MOU is in existence, do you know if that we can continue to receive money from T-bid?
That's a what-if question we haven't brought up. It would be something that I would go, I'm assuming, plain what if, that at that particular time, those commitments that have been committed to at that particular time would still be valid versus going back and retroactively. So I would say yes, it would be.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And Mayor, I actually had a question for a little clarification on paragraph number 1. Councilmember Rupsis, if you could help me with this. When we talk about the $6 million in capital fund raising, $6 million in grants, and it says it's going to reduce the amount that must be levied by the taxpayers, are you talking about that we reduce the $143 million? Is that right?
Yeah, so there will be a certain amount of money that will be in the bank from those donations in that capital campaign before we ever issue a bond, before things are kicked off. So what we'd like to say is that, if that money is available, then whatever that project budget is for that first tranche would be reduced by that amount for the bonds that actually have to be issued.
Okay, and so to follow up on that, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So some people, I think there's an option for people who donate to specific projects. So if their project's not in that first tranche, that money will, sit in limbo until a project comes forward?
That may happen, yes.
Okay. And then, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when we, I think you mentioned that the money can be used to pay off either the debt or towards to just paying off the debt or borrow less. Is there any reason why, and maybe this is a question for Andy, I don't know if you're talking about this, but to make sure we issue some type of callable bonds so we know that some of these bonds are not going to be paid out for 10 years, or some of the donations and pledges are not going to be paid out for 10 years. Is there any reason why we wouldn't want to hold on to some of those funds and then call those bonds back, and so we're not paying interest for another 10 years after that?
I'm sorry, that would have to be a question for Andy.
Okay, if we can find that out, I think that would be an option that maybe to take a look at to do a callable bond so we can pay that off and have less interest paid.
And Mayor and Councilmember Neese, my presumption would be that would be part of what we always get and would expect to get in this go around from our financial consultants to guide us as to which path, how restrictive or how wide, to put these bonds together to get the lowest interest rate, the most competitive bids, while all with the goal of keeping the taxpayer's liability or cost as low as possible. So.
Thank you. And Mayor, one last question I had on this section was regarding, and you kind of mentioned it and asked it, Mayor, but I wanted to ask Tom, because I know I've heard in the news the ice arena has had financial troubles and equipment issues for a long time. And you said it's not a huge amount of money. Is that really considered a pledge? I'm really concerned that we're touting that they're stepping up and going to donate us equipment that's, worth 10 cents on the dollar, and that's not a whole lot, maybe even less than that, depending on what they have. So has there any been talk about what the actual amount is that they have to donate? Otherwise, I think we should not even include that, because in my mind, there's no value there. At least I perceive no value in the equipment.
I do think it's a commitment that the community has made. I think it's worth documenting. All right, it may not be a large amount. That's certainly true. But it is something, these are assets that community owns, that they have invested in and purchased over the years. And I think it shows some commitment to making this happen and doing their part to help make it happen, even though it might not be a large. I mean, honestly, if somebody wants to have a lemonade stand and raise money for this, I'm all over it. Let's get them in here and get that part of the capital campaign, whatever we can do to help reduce the cost.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Trickey and Councilmember Purington?
Okay, so there are a couple of different things that jump out at me. The million-dollar question is the PARS commitment being included in the July 10th exemption?
No, that was the first pledge under the capital campaign.
So that will count towards the 6 million. Okay, thank you. So is the amount of money that we're actually excluding then is like $500,000, less than that?
I'm sorry, excluding from what?
By excluding any pledges or donations?
It's probably about $500,000. Yes, between Colson and Landis Legacy, I think they were 300,000 to 400,000. Colson had through 250, 300,000, somewhere in there. I forget the exact number, Steve. Maybe Steve can answer that. And then I think there's 45 or 50,000 for Cottonwood.
Was there any pushback from any of those groups that were supporting those specific projects?
No.
No. Okay. Number 4, number 5, well, paragraph 5 brought up a question in my mind. It seems to me really that we're making these pledges, people are making these pledges to specific projects. So these targets should be for these specific projects, and any shortfallings should not hit all of the projects. It should just be directed at the projects that didn't raise the 8% or whatever it is that's in there.
Councilmember Ripsis, you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, and I certainly get that sentiment, right? We've had a lot of conversations with that over the last 6 to 12 months. And I think the notion here is that, these projects, they work as a package. When we do a capital campaign, we're doing a campaign as a package of improvements and investments in the community. And we didn't want to have, specific targets for each particular project. We look at a South Park pool and how much should the residents in the South Park area raise to help build that pool when we're all paying for that community asset. So that's why it wasn't done. I certainly get the sentiment, but we didn't want to really take away from the fact that this package invests across the entire community, and the capital campaign should be approached that way as well.
I can live with that, thank you. Paragraph 14. So here we're talking about basically Parks Department having somebody who's going to be creating a new program for keeping track of who's doing operations and maintenance and some of our other things. Is there any thought as to how this is going to be staffed and funded? Or is Mike just going to give up his Saturdays and do it himself?
Councilmember Rupsis, and then we do have Director Pig if he wants to comment.
So what I'd say is here, there are lots of different models for how Adopt a Park and Adopt a Trail programs are developed, and Director Pig will certainly do a lot of evaluation and find out what's the best way to implement that here in Billings. We do have a foundation, we have other groups like Billings TrailNet that might be involved in this. We have a lot of good corporate partnerships, those types of things. So it all depends. There are lots of different models, and we have to do some analysis to figure out what's the best one for us.
Yeah, I'm just aware that in the past, public-private partnerships haven't gone as far as they could because parks has lacked the staffing to pull that off.
This would be great to hear from our park director how Adopt a Park project might work since we are babes in the woods.
Mayor and Council, so there is a cost to all of that, as you're pointing out. We do have a volunteer coordinator, outreach coordinator that we call him now, that does work on that now and brings in volunteer hours. And so I would see we would fold that into his duties and his roles. We expanded his role a few years ago, adding the outreach into that. So, we have expanded what he has to do, and he does have limited time. So there will be some costs or some expenses incurred, yes.
Okay, on that, Councilmember Tidswell?
Who is that?
His name is Jake Milliron. We just hired him 2 months ago. It was Chris Waite for a while, and then we had Paul Reinhardt was our other ones.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Puritan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to back up what Councilmember Neese was going for on paragraph 9. The first sentence says the ice and aquatics communities have made commitments to donate existing equipment that can be used at the recreation center. Then, as he mentioned before, the ice community, they're committed to liquidating Centennial Ice, but and it's such a big if on remaining assets there. I mean, what are the assets? If it's just equipment, you've already covered that in 9. I don't think that to elevate what the ice community is doing over what the aquatics community is doing, because we don't have a number on any of those. And I would not, I'm not even sure that 9 has a place, because we've got other people that are really supporting this. Okay, we'll say Par Montana. They're not in here, and we already know what they're going to do. So I would delete 9 completely. And so anyone else have a comment about that? That was my whole comment on that one. I would just delete 9.
Councilmember Rips, I'll let you comment. I agree. If they're making any sort of a commitment, it would be nice to have something in here. Otherwise, we send the message that this is a freebie for the ice community and the swimming community. Personally, I don't like to send that message. I wonder if one angle would be we're expecting something from them. How they come up with that, maybe it's premature to put out a specific number. I've thrown numbers out in the past, they've gone nowhere. But maybe we need something more specific, and if only we're going to provide I don't want to say a box, but the basic facility. But those sports often require pretty sophisticated score cords, or timers and I don't call them bells and whistles because they're not luxuries, but they're things that once they see the facility there, they're going to be very motivated to raise the money for those late stage pieces of equipment that maybe we don't have to, especially if it doesn't fit within this budget. And we should warn them about that they're not necessarily getting a complete facility. It's expected that they're going to have to pony up something. That's the concept, but do you want to comment on that, Councilor Rosas?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Purinton. I do think this is a good point. The ice and aquatics community haven't gotten together and said, you know what, we're going to raise X million dollars from day one, and this is what we're committed to. However, they did make these commitments to use equipment as much as possible to help equip that facility. They stood here year and committed to supporting ongoing fundraising through advertising, sponsorships, those types of things, as well as facility surcharges throughout the life of these bonds. And so those facility surcharges, advertising, naming rights, sponsorships, those types of things are conservatively estimated to generate $650,000 per year. So $13 million over the course of the bonds, of the lifetime, the 20-year life of those bonds. And so, those surcharges will primarily fall on the groups that are doing events and tournaments and leagues at the recreation center, which in large part will be the aquatics, the ice communities, courts communities, which really don't have one kind of unique spokesperson for them either. So I think, that particular commitment, while it says here, it talks about the facility surcharges, the number itself doesn't come in until the rec center management portion of the document. I don't have any problem of including that here as well, but I do think we should recognize that they are on board and they have agreed to those surcharges, which will primarily hit those groups, and that's their commitment instead of upfront capital campaigns to pay that over 20 years. All their leagues will be more expensive, their events will be more expensive, those types of things. So that's how their financial commitment is coming into play here.
So to try to figure out how to proceed forward, because I think that's a very important point and a perfectly legitimate one, would you have any objection to working with Gina to revise this to make that point that we will be expecting to see significant dollars coming from the ice community, the swimming community? That may come, without naming a specific dollar, I guess, at this point, but that may come in the form of significant surcharges, reference numbers to the extent that we can, possible late stage, I don't know how you call it, but late stage equipment donations, just to sort of set the record so that there's something we can always point back to and remind those communities of their need to put forth some real money. Councilmember Purrington, you raised this. Councilmember Nish, you raised this. Is that okay? I mean, does that meet with your guys' concerns?
Well, I'm wondering too, Mr. Mayor, if it would better serve the recreation center management. I don't know. Well, I guess that's different. I still am not convinced, I guess, Councilmember Rupsis, that because if you're building 2 sheets of ice and you're building these pools, they're going to use it. And, they're going to have to pay to use it. So I'm not sure that pointing it out and making this paragraph that says they're going to commit to this. I'm still not really on board for that. I guess I won't fall on that sword, but.
Yeah, real quick. Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Purrington. I would just say that the ice and aquatics community didn't have to say that, yeah, we're up for increased fees for the next 20 years. That's a commitment. And I want to recognize that. They didn't have to come up here and say that, this is what we estimate that we'll get from new events every year, or that, they came and they did that. They know it's going to be a financial impact to them, and yes, they should, because they are driving a lot of this need. But I think to their credit, they recognize that, and they're amenable to this approach of fundraising, as opposed to doing a capital campaign up front, where if we were to ask them to raise $13 million and then we'll build the rec center, it's a much less attainable target than saying that, we'll pay off our commitment over 20 years through facility surcharges.
Okay. So clearly some work in that paragraph 9, I think, will need to be done. Move on, Councilmember Owen.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to bog down on this too much, so I'll try not to get too far in the weeds here, but do you have a sense at this point of what their price responsiveness is? Because at some point, we're going to have an actual cost of operation that will drive an actual surcharge, and they actually might not be able to pay it without having parents leave the league or push to go to Hardin or Cody or wherever else. So what's the price responsiveness here?
Well, I think, they were up here and talking about every weekend where they have to go somewhere else to do an event. and it costs them hundreds of dollars to do that through fuel costs and hotel and meals and those types of things. I think they're very clear that they have the capacity and then the desire to take on this commitment.
But so what you're telling me is there is a limit. At the point at which, even with a hotel room and a meal, it's cheaper to go to Hardin for a swim meet, they're going to go to Hardin for a swim meet. Is that?
Sure,
Yeah,
I think we all have limits, yep.
Yeah, sure. And then I think, Tom, you and I have talked about this a little bit, and I don't think I've had an answer yet. But we talk about if a project runs over, and my main concern is this rec center is going to run over. Okay, so if it does, we do value engineering, and we hope that we could pull a rabbit out of our hat. But if it's a big overrun, it's probably going to mean a sheet of ice gets cut. And so if that sheet of ice gets cut, how much does this financial model start to collapse? How much of our assumptions are based on generating surcharges at 2 sheets of ice?
Well, I think certainly there would be some impact there, of course, and it impacts both sides, not only the reduced revenues that might be available through surcharges, but the reduced expenses of maintaining 2 sheets of ice. So, no, I don't think we've modeled that out. But I think, if we get to that point, that community has to make that decision that says this is the best path forward, and the best path forward is reducing that ice, and then we have to relook at that and make sure that the entire package works together. Otherwise, that's not a decent piece of value engineering if that throws off the entire model.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments in this second section? Councilmember Neese, Councilmember Purington?
Mayor, I'm sorry, I don't want to beat a dead horse when I'm going to beat it. Because I want you to know that I think, Mayor, you brought up a good point about this, and I didn't think that is, I think this does send a bad message. Because, in essence, the ice community, the swim community are trading in their 1978 Yugo for a F-150 Super Duty. And yeah, they're going to pay, a little bit more at the pump. But you know what? They can now run with this brand new car and air conditioner, not worry about it. And it's going to send a message to the public that that's what's happening. And so I'm with Councilmember Purington that there's really not a whole lot there. I would recommend you pulling it out of there, but I think I'm in the minority. But I think the mayor's right. This is going to send a message, a wrong message to the public. But thank you.
Okay, if you want to comment?
Yeah, just again, real quickly, if we're going to call a $13 million commitment, chump change, I think we're having a very different conversation. They have made a significant commitment to support this.
And Councilmember Rufus, run us through, the 650 number was a combination, wasn't just surcharge dollars.
Nope. That's true. The surcharge, sponsorships, advertising, naming rights, those types of things. If we're talking about naming or sponsoring a sheet of ice or a locker room or whatever, those groups are going to be the ones driving that, going out and getting their sponsors and pulling those people into those companies and donors in to support those facilities. So, a large part of that will fall on that community to go out and raise those funds through their normal operations of supporting their leagues.
Okay, but just to be clear, we're not holding up construction for that element of funding. We are potentially for the $6 million capital up front, but if they said a sheet of ice is $100, because we really like our whoever they wouldn't have control of that, and we just wouldn't allow that. But yeah, they can help with that, but they don't have a direct requirement that they raise any particular dollar amount in that.
No, that will fall on the rec center management to make sure that those things happen. And I can't imagine any facility manager that would be running 2 sheets of ice and not engage the ice community in selling sponsorships and support for those amenities.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm going to recognize Councilmember Joy. We haven't heard from you that much.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I really do think that it's important to name our partners and to hold them to account lest they forget, so that it's very clear. The specific dollar amount isn't really clear at this point, but it will be clear as we go forward. So I think it's very good. They stepped up and said they wanted to do this. And even before we got to this point of putting together a capital bond ask to the public, they have been in council and in meetings for years saying, we're ready to do this. So I think it's absolutely important to recognize and lest they forget, this is your commitment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There were some other hands. Councilman Purrington, did you have your hand up? Okay, okay. Okay, anything else on the section 2 before we move on to section 3? I don't see any, so we'll move on. Section 3 is project management, how stuff gets constructed, who, when, things like that. Back to Councilmember Rupsis for the overview.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, this entire section around project management is how are we thinking about these projects, identified projects, actually getting built and that benefit delivered to the community. There, in the first parts of these, there's not a lot of changes in number 1. Number 2, one of our recurring themes, again, and Councilmember Owen brought it up again, is how are we making sure that benefits and projects are being done in such a way that the entire community is benefiting from the start, as opposed to one part of the community waiting for 5 years before they get their particular park taken care of. So one of the things in number 2, I was using the word parallel, and I think that wasn't specific enough to provide some comfort, especially to Councilmember Owen, that when the rec center is being built, the parks projects are also being built. Everything is happening not necessarily parallel, which was my original word, concurrently, simultaneously. These things are happening together. We're not kicking off the rec center and going on that project and then waiting and holding everything else until that completes. So a big part of this section is talking about these projects happening concurrently. 2B3, this is a new section or statement, again, part of our big focus of our conversation a couple weeks ago when our little work group met. It was really around making sure that these projects are happening concurrently. Council prefers approaches to see improvements made throughout the city each year, as opposed to approaches that focus on completing a single park at a time. So we're not going to do Castle Rock and then Centennial and then South Park or whatever order that might be. We're going to look for opportunities to deliver value each year throughout the city, as opposed to just focusing on one thing at a time. In our conversation, we felt that that first tranche, that might be no more than a third of the total bond package, our inclination would be that we should focus on the South Park pool and that center, and the community centers at Castle Rock, North Parks, Pioneer, and Centennial Park. But we do have this understanding that we're not construction experts, and when we get into the point where we're actually designing and engineering these projects, we might get some guidance from our consultants and construction managers that the most efficient, effective, productive way to push these out might not be that. So we wanted to express our preference that this is where we think we should focus first, but with the understanding that we might be a little smarter 6 months, 12 months from now than we are today. Let's at least let ourselves recognize that. The next thing I wanted to call out here in section C, again, this recurring theme, in the event the rec center construction costs exceed the budget, the gap will be reduced by value engineering, reduction of scope, an additional capital campaign to raise funds privately. We're not going to go raid the GEO bond budgets of other projects to fund the recreation center. Again, the recreation center may not be increased by using GEO bonds allocated for other parks and trails projects. And then the section 3 there, recreation center construction shall not begin before construction on the first selected group of parks projects has begun. Again, these things are happening concurrently. We're not often running on one project and leaving everything else behind. Number 3, it talks about this idea of community steering committees. Again, we want our community driving the decisions on design and scope, and when we have to make decisions on, what types of amenities, what things are in and out, because we do know that every project will be constrained and these decisions will have to be made. We want community steering committees making these decisions, not Mike sitting in his office saying, well, I like this one and not this one, right? We want the community taking the ownership of those things and driving that. So we will have community steering committees comprised of residents or owners of businesses in the general service area of the project. There was some discussion about, well, how do we define what that service area is? I think we have to just be a little flexible and understand that, when we get there, we'll know it when we see it, I think. And so we had some points of accountability listed in here in 3B, 2, 3, and 4, or 1 through 4. Each committee will have at least a council member and a representative of the neighborhood task force in that area, if there is a task force. We won't have more than one employee or board member from the Chamber of Commerce, more than one from Big Sky Economic Development, more than one from Billings TrailNet. City administrator should take care to not put people on these committees that have potential conflicts of interest. We don't want to have a construction project manager or a construction company owner who could potentially be doing work at one of these projects on that steering committee. We just want to avoid that perception of potential conflict. And then, of course, as I'm sure he always would do, the city administrator will confer with council as he's trying to figure out who's on these committees, taking recommendations, conferring with us to make sure that we're setting up the committees appropriately with the right people and the right voices in the community. Finally, again, I think I copied from Councilmember Owen's emails here or comments in F. 3F, I think it is, each committee shall have a chairperson, and once per quarter, all the chairs will meet of the different projects so that everybody can make sure we're all on the same page. Everybody knows what all our project status is. Community steering committees will be public meetings. Anybody can attend these, even if you're not on the committee. Minutes shall be kept and made available. I think as we've done with our council committees, we want to have audio available as minutes if that's acceptable. Final point here being, we will set up city will set up a website, public-facing website, so everybody can see the minutes, the project status, master plans, all those types of things, budgets, everything that you can see listed in there for projects any particular time. My original language said that the city administrator shall provide us, council, monthly reports. I think if we have an ongoing, live, regularly updated website, we don't need to have monthly reports here, but perhaps quarterly might be acceptable in that case. So that was the thoughts that we have on project management at this point. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. I recognize Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Tidswell.
Thank you. In regards to the, if the rec center goes over budget, the budget shall be reduced, and you have specifically all of these things. Is that really necessary? I mean, that's number little I3.
3C1?
Yeah, probably
3C1, yeah. In event.
2C1, in the event that the recreation
Yes.
construction costs exceed the budget,
Yes.
the gap will be reduced by either value engineering, reduction of scope, or an additional capital campaign to raise funds privately.
Yeah, no, I understand the intent, but it doesn't really seem like you have to enumerate each one of those things that you could possibly do. It just simply is clear that if it exceeds its budget, no additional capital can be, no additional, or let's see, I'm sorry, I'm seeing a little bit, I think it's just a little bit wordy by putting every single one of those things in there. And you can just simply say, it can't use GO bonds that are allocated to another project. And just make it one simple sentence and kind of take all that wordiness out of it. That's just a recommendation, a suggestion.
You want to comment, Councilor Ripps and Councilor Tidswell?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, just real briefly, I think the only point there was that we want to be open and honest with people that if this happens, these are the possible outcomes, right? We might decide, or not we, but that committee making these decisions might decide that the best course of action is to reduce by one ice rink, or to, have 7 swim lanes instead of 8, whatever that happens to be. I think we just need to be open with people that that is a possibility, that those decisions might have to be made. And so that's why it was specifically worded that way. I get the point, though.
Thank you, Councilmember Tidswell and Councilmember Tricky.
Thank you, Mayor. Tom, can we change the budget for the recreation center may not be increased to shall not be increased? Yeah, it's the little
sorry.
Continuation of.
Yeah, the budget of the recreation center may not be increased, it says right now, but can we do that? Can we do shall not?
So I think if you're looking at little 3, it does say.
No, I think 2C,
Oh, okay,
little I.
I see.
Correct.
The
We're on
second
the-
sentence,
yep.
though.
Thank you. Yep, we'll change that so it's consistent with number 3.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tricky?
I was just going to point out that there's at least one more option, which would be to put up for vote another GO bond. And there's probably something else that's a possibility in there too.
You're much braver than I, Councilman Tree.
I'm just saying, I'm just simply saying that there are other.
Isn't that Powerball up to like 1.2 billion or something like that?
I mean, it could come, they could come out of the general fund. It could,
There are probably other
there's a
options.
number of different options that are in there, so.
I'm sorry, Mayor, thank you. That's a good point, and I think we wanted to be very specific to say, you know what, coming out of the general fund it shouldn't be, well, we didn't put it in there specifically because we don't want to have one project that might be privileged by the ability to come out of the general fund, and maybe that's a higher visibility project than something else that would then be limited to value engineering. All right, so I think we wanted to very specifically state that these projects should live within these budgets and decisions should be made to hit these budgets as opposed to then coming out of general fund or other tax-based resources.
I get that. I
Yep.
just think that by putting all those extra words in there, you're confusing it and making it, I think you're a lot better off by just simply saying, no more money is going to come out of this specific GO bond.
Councilmember Rupsis on 2B, little 2, dealing with the steering committees. Well, first here, budgets for any individual project may not be increased by reallocating funds from another project without the explicit approval of the affected community steering committees. A technical point and a more substantive one. Because this is the first reference to steering committees and nobody has any idea what a steering committee is at that point, I think you need to say describe in section 3 below or flip them and have the steering committees defined so people know what you're talking about. But then more substantively, and this same point becomes relevant in section 3, little d, where we're talking about the authority of the steering committee. In 3D, it says, as design and scope decisions need to be made, the committees should make those decisions. This is big stuff. And I guess I'm not personally comfortable with allocating that kind of authority to unelected officials or unelected community members that we have no track record with, especially. Do we really want to do that? As opposed to giving them authority to make recommendations to the council, but the way I'm reading this is, once we create these puppies, we have bound ourselves, and that at least scares me. I don't know about the rest of you. Councilmember Owens nodding her head, and Councilmember Denise. Is that, I'm seeing kind of, I think, consensus on that.
I think that's a very fair point. We change that to make recommendations to either staff or the council, depending on how those,
Okay, okay. Other, is this Councilmember Purington?
Funny you said that, Mayor, because that was exactly where I was going with that. The authority of those steering committees, that they're going to be the ones that decide whether or not we have one sheet of ice or not. That's not within their scope of authority, I don't believe. So however you change that. So thank you for bringing that up, and I do support what you were saying.
Okay. And Councilmember Tricky? Oh, and Councilmember Tricky, and then Councilmember Owen and Denise?
Are we going to need to have something like a resolution or something like that in order to enact these steering committees?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Tricky, what you're
Actually-
looking at, I wasn't sure if he was looking at me or.
Either way, you help me if I get off path here. But Councilmember Chiriqui, to answer your question, Mayor and Council, I think that's the difference of having the administrator shall establish. Now, that being said, right, there's a lot of prescriptive stuff in here, so there's got to be a collaboration between administrator and council. But it is, if you were to turn it to be council assigned, then you have a set of criteria, rules, and bureaucracy, for a lack of a better term, that you have to follow to make decisions about who's on these. So we're threading that deliberately as it being administrator, and you're pretty prescriptive on some of these pieces.
So we do need to write something up?
No?
No? Okay.
Because the
This is the
committees are
write-up.
being, as currently drafted, created by the city administrator, we can work with him, but he can create the animal.
All right. All right.
Councilmembers Owen and Denise?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I share the concern on what these committees can decide themselves, because there probably are some decisions they can make versus what they need to recommend to council, so somehow we should delineate that. I had included a few things that I think in my very brief emails might have gotten overlooked. And one of them was that someone would only serve on one committee, rather than having the same people show up on these committees over and over and over. And I think that's something worth considering and having in here. And then I had also had a recommendation that we make sure that the public-facing website identified there in 5 doesn't get stale. So I had suggested that it be updated at least once a week. I don't know if that's too much, but I think we want to make sure that this really is a real-time information source. And then the last question that I had is, here in 2B2, the language there might just be confused or I'm misreading it, but it would seem to suggest that we could do exactly what I'm afraid we could do there, which is dip into the proposed budget of one project to increase the funding of another project. So I'm not sure if you just mean sub-budgets of the larger totals there. So, for example, in Castle Rock Park, if we decide to do, 150,000 to the pump track instead of 150,000 to trails, that the committee can make that decision, versus saying we need an extra 500,000, so we're going to go get it from Cottonwood. Do you know what I'm saying? So I feel like that language got a little squirrely.
Is there a proposal for a change of the language by either
Well,
Councilmembers or?
I'm interested to know.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're intending, is that you should not be able to take budget from another project. Castle Rock should not be able to, come out with a $12.5 million estimate and then take $500,000 away from, Centennial Park, unless the Centennial Park Steering Committee says, you know what, we're good with this, right? And then based on our other language that we were just talking about, that probably has to come through staff or council or something like that. But, it may very well be possible that the Castle Rock Committee gets to about $11 million and they're like, we can't spend any more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll happen, right? But
Huge
it
probability.
may happen in some case, and we want to have some type of mechanism that budget can be reallocated because we know that every project pretty much will be constrained. So if there are opportunities to use those funds that have already been bonded and put out there, that we should allow those to serve the benefit of the community instead of just sitting there idle.
So doesn't that raise the risk then? Or do you believe the other language is belts and suspenders, that the rec center runs over and they start pressuring all these community groups? Or do you think the other language expressly cuts that off?
I think the other language specifically says the rec center itself, if it goes over, will be value engineered or reduced in scope or private fundraising, yes. I think they work together. To address the other 2 points, the one, no resident can serve on more than one committee, I think becomes a little bit of problematic when we look at some of the projects and maybe there are multiple in a ward and a council member. We said at least one council member has to be on there. We have things like Billings TrailNet. They don't have a lot of staff and they might have to sit on, there are like 5 different trails projects. They should be able to sit on those kind of committees, one per committee, those types of things. So I think that just that idea that no resident can sit on more than one, I think just becomes a little problematic when we look at actual staffing numbers and availability for some of those groups to participate in that. And then finally, the third issue, I forget, can you remind me?
Even that website, real time.
Yeah, exactly. And I just hesitate about putting weekly and use timely instead. I just don't know that weekly is going to be the most
Regular
frequency.
routine, I don't care what it looks like. But
Regularly.
as to your point on the duplication, I think maybe, can we just include some language that says we shall endeavor to, not duplicate members? TrailNet has board members, they can, I don't want us to have 12 same committees.
Councilmember Parrington?
Okay, so I don't think we,
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
I will defer to you,
Okay, I
Councilmember.
apologize. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, I'm done. No, one of the things I think, and again, this whole idea of creating these steering committees is concerning, but I'm assuming then, Tom, when these projects are done, the committees expire, they're done. Is there a term limit that we need to kind of put in here somewhere, or are we going to like ongoing, well, we haven't spent all the money, so we're going to keep that steering committee go till we raise more money and that. So what's the time limit on something like this?
Certainly, I think as city administrator appointed committees, it would be up to the administrator to release that committee when it's no longer needed. If we were doing something like a Citizens Police Advisory Board where we're establishing all these committees through resolution as part of council, then we have to look at time limits and those types of things. I think the way it's expressed here as a CA committee, I don't think that we necessarily have to take that responsibility.
Okay, thank you. And then what size of these committees do you anticipate? You said to be nimble. So what size are you expecting them to be?
I think we might have very different sizes according to the project. The rec center committee might be much larger than the Zimmerman Center committee in Pioneer Park. So just, again, wanting to be, nimble but sufficient to serve the purpose.
Okay, and that's a concern of mine because as you look who's going to be on there, you've got 3 of them from, from organizations that are really vested in building these things out in different ways. So I'm concerned that some of these committees may be a little stacked. And then as Councilmember Owen brought up into when you have these ideas of now these steering committees can reallocate funds from one project to another across the city, that's really concerning because the steering committees are the ones who can, approve that. And so I am a little concerned the way that structure works out, and I think there should be some better language tied in there. And I do agree within the scope of the park, maybe they should be willing to move some funds from one internal project to another, but I don't think they should be able to move across park lines from one park to another. And I don't know how to change that, but I believe that's very concerning to see that we say in one section, we're not going to spend the money from one park to another in geo bonds, but then now we have the ability to do that.
Councilmember
Thank you, Mayor. And I think based on the conversation we just had and being more precise about the scope and not responsibilities, but capabilities of these committees, being more precise about that, saying that those decisions really had to come back through staff or through council. I think this would be a perfect case where, if that overall budget allocation were to be recommended to be changed, it should come back through the council.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purinton?
And that was exactly what I was going to say, because I'm concerned about 2B2 also, that this money can be shifted around based upon, what these steering committees want to do, and I don't think they should be the ones that do it. Council is the one that has voted for the levy. They're the ones that approve this resolution. I think anything that has to do with money, with the budget, it needs to come back to council. I don't think any committee or the city administrator would be within their scope. I think the council needs to be responsible for the monies that is taken from the taxpayers. And I shouldn't say it that way, but I meant, that comes from the taxpayers. We are basically responsible for those.
Okay, thank you. Council, I'm not going to rush you. I just reminding you we're a little past 7:30. We'll take a break soon, but let's try to wrap up. We're making good progress in this section, and then we'll take a break. But what else is there on this one? Councilmember Tricky.
I just have one that I consider to be a minor issue, but as we're going through and calculating the geo bonds and stuff like that, I want to make sure that it's understood that the Sabura bond is not a part of those calculations, and that, if the Sabura bond needs to go, right away in order to start for planning and stuff like that, that is something that can be done.
Councilor Ripsis, can you comment on that?
Absolutely. We know that we've got a time constraint on Sabura in terms, and, getting the value out of that, potential value out of that district. So I think there'll be everybody will be working hard to get those bonds, those Sabura bonds, identified and scoped as quickly as possible to get those out. They'll be primarily design and starting some of that groundwork and other types of activities to build that recreation center.
Thank you.
Councilor Ripsis, can I draw your attention to the prohibition on conflicts of interest in paragraph 3B, little 3, that says the city administrator shall ensure that residents with potential conflicts of interest shall not be appointed to any community steering committee. Of course, we know conflict of interest is in the eye of the beholder, and we can't even define that amongst ourselves. We have this concept of a personal conflict of interest. We want everybody on these committees to be very interested in the outcome, which means that they are going to have an opinion, and that's why we're putting them on the committee. I think that you're probably talking about some very obvious financial conflict of interest. You gave the example of a contractor who's on the committee that would try to steer the award of a contract to themselves. I don't think any of us would disagree with that. Do we have a way to tighten up that language a little bit so that we don't rule out people who just have an interest in the outcome? Every task force member, every city council member probably with, in their project, you could say has some sort of, quote, conflict. Any comments on that? And Gina, maybe we could, there are statutes out there that deal with kind of this financials. Maybe we could reference those, but that'd be my suggestion that we try to.
Would it be sufficient to just say ensure that residents with potential financial conflicts of interest not participate? Would that be?
That would be an improvement, in my opinion.
Done. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on this third section before we could take a break? Okay. All right. Thank you, Council. We're making good progress. We'll take a 5-minute break at 7:37. Probably more like 8 minutes. We'll try to be back by 1:45 or before, and we'll finish up with that fourth section on rec center management.
Right down.
Yeah.
You're having a breakdown?
Follow it, all right?
Let's hope somebody knows how to do it. We always get jammed at some point.
Okay, Pam, and we're ready to go.
Oh, I think so. Well, it sounds like you and Gina just got in the hall, so we're talking about all our dumb ideas. Hey, and you're kind of quiet tonight. Get in the middle of it.
He's saving it up.
He's gonna come in strong right at the end. We do have a question. Yeah, okay.
Mayor, can I ask a question?
That doesn't cause you a hardship?
Should we go on record or just quickie before we start?
You could go on record if you want to call it back.
All right, let's get started then.
So I just have.
Welcome
oh,
back,
I'm sorry.
everybody. At the break, Councilmember Purrington said that she had a query before we jump into the fourth section, Recreation Center Management. Councilmember Purrington?
Okay, so I'm trying, okay, I guess it's 4, under number 4, about the minutes, recordings, public meetings, and all of this.
This would be in the third section.
In the third section, what we just
paragraph
finished.
4, okay?
I'm getting concerned that we're saying that these are all going to be public meetings. They're all going to have audio and written minutes. I don't know if it says written minutes, but I'm just kind of concerned. I mean, if you have a committee of, say, 4 people, 5 people, and that could very well be for these steering committees, and they're going to meet at City Brew and have their meeting there. To me, that's not a public meeting. I don't know why they need to be public. And what started the conversation, I told Chris, I said, you're going to have to buy a whole bunch of those little recorders. Why do they, I know, that's another expense, but it will come out of the bonds. But I'm just saying, why do we have to have all of these to be public? Because if they make if there's a place for them to post their minutes, their written minutes, because, they're going to have to take minutes, especially when they first start out. Well, just so that the committee can keep going. You don't think they need to do that either? But I'm just saying, I just think and if the city administrator is appointing these committees, he doesn't have to have he doesn't have to make them public. So I'm just wondering if number 4, we don't need to do that, I don't think.
Well, what does council think? Councilmember Ripsis and Councilmember
I would
Boyd.
actually defer to Councilmember Owens. This was copied from her email, so.
Councilmember Owen and then Councilmember Boyette and Gillick.
Councilmember Boyd will disagree with me on this because I know he does, but I absolutely think they should be public meetings. We're talking here about people who get to have heavy-handed recommendations about what goes into parks. And I think people in the neighborhood need to have a chance to voice their thoughts about that. Now, they can come here to a public meeting, right? We're not taking them out of the process. But I think that there is a significant amount of concern in the community about how these dollars will get spent, concerns about how parks dollars have been spent in the past, and I think maximizing the public voice in the process of directing those dollars, having oversight on those dollars, and having input is really important. So for me, it matters. And yes, there's some burden to that, but we have multiple rooms here at City Hall that people can use. We have rooms at the library they can use. I think they can probably for a while still use the first floor of the Miller Building. So we have options for them, and I don't think it's an insurmountable challenge. So for me, it's important, and that's why I had suggested to be included.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Boyette wanted to comment, and Councilmember Gillick.
Yeah, I just think it's very cumbersome. The minutes or a synopsis of what the committee talked about should be posted or given to the council. But 4 people in a committee talking at the coffee shop, I find that a tape recording of that minutes could be very cumbersome. We're going to need multiple little recording devices at different times of the day, and who's going to post all this? Why not just have them make a synopsis of what their committee is talking about and give that to the council? They're not going to approve anything, these steering committees. They're just going to give guidance on what they think Castle Rock Park should do. They're not going to make any decisions. We are.
Okay, one question will be whether anybody will know when a meeting is going to actually happen to show up. Well, with that notice issue we should talk about. But Councilmember Gillick, you had your hand up. And
Yeah, so, I mean, the fact that the council actually has the spending authority, it lessens in my mind the concern about having them. So it actually comes more down to concern about capacity, staff capacity to manage all of those. But I do have a suggestion that, I mean, within the trails, there's like, 4 or 5 little projects there. I wonder if that's one committee that handles all those that can reduce the number of projects we're talking about considerably, I think. And it also has the advantage of, if there are questions of allocating where do we move things with one project comes, bids come in favorable and the others it's over, I think that it's easier to have one committee deal with that. So I would suggest that we just have one committee for that. I guess maybe it's a question for Chris and or Mike in terms of how do we go about or logistics of having these be public.
And just so we don't lose that, I think we probably would all agree that one trails committee probably sufficient and work that into it. So, but you had a question for, what was your question?
Just what are the logistics of making these public in terms of our staff capacity or what's involved for them or, yeah.
So, Councilmember Gulick, Mayor and Council, so really the best example is the transition we've made this year with the subcommittees of the council. Those are committees. They require, and as they should, their notice, agenda, posting, minutes, and tracking. So, there is work that comes along with it for sure, but so I appreciate and ask that you guys recognize that there's certainly a fair amount of logistic work that will need to be done to do this and do this right. So the clearer you can be, clarity is of utmost so that we're not sitting here arguing later as to what the intent was or wasn't intent. That'd be first and foremost. And then the clerk's office, Winnet, those would be the resources, and those are the same folks who we've added to the other committee work.
Okay, who have we not heard from? Denise, Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Rupsis.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, city staff has done this with Recode, and there were 5 different working groups, all of them public, and all of them had moving pieces. Were there a lot of public at everyone? No. The people most affected by the zoning were the people who showed, but they were all public, and maybe they've got some tricks on how to manage that much meeting time, but that was all public. Thank you.
Councilmember Boyette, Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess the bottom line is, where would you wish to have these steering committees meet? Not at a coffee shop, but probably here at the city hall or maybe the library, so that you can have control over.
Yeah, you want to be consistent about when they meet and where they meet, because that really helps whoever is responsible for noticing and all those logistics. It just makes it simpler.
Okay. Okay, Councilmember Denise.
Just to clarify, it states here that audio recording shall suffice as minutes. It doesn't say you have to use audio recordings, so they could do written if they like. So they could meet in the coffee shop and do their written minutes and turn them in. So I don't think it's going to be an undue burden of having to go out and buy a bunch of recorders and that. They just got to make sure they get proper notice so public can come and meet at the coffee shop with them. They have their notes and send it and get it posted.
Okay. All right, Council, let's move on then to the last item here, the rec center management section. Again, that was crossed out, the old one, and then rewritten. So the red line version looks like it's huge changes, but it's not. That's a little misleading. We'll turn it over to Councilmember Rupsis for the summary.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, in the conversations in the work group, there was a lot of sense that it was just overly complex and trying to figure too many things out, and we're not really at the point now where we can really make some real hard determinations of what this should look like. So most of the content is the same with the old one and the new one, with the real change being the first thing that the city administrator will do will be to appoint a committee that can help figure out the optimal management structure for the rec center. It may end up being privately managed. It may end up being the Parks Department might put in a bid. We might get something from Amen Park Development Council. Who knows? But really separating this from the political machinations of the council, and I think some of the potential pitfalls that we've seen with how the Metro Park was kind of discussed, take that out of our hands and let a committee of qualified, experienced people that have experience in legal issues and financial issues, operational issues, all those kinds of things, that can work through potential different management structures, and then make a recommendation to council at that point coming out of that. So a lot of the structure here is the same as before. Again, the primary mission of the Recreation Center is to serve the diverse recreational needs of the residents of Billings. The secondary mission of the Recreation Center is to support economic activity through sports, tourism, and related events. Don't want to lose that focus that the primary reason that this facility will exist is to serve us here in Billings and everybody in Billings, from toddlers to seniors, and any level of interest that exists for us. It's not an ice and aquatic facility for 12-year-olds to compete. It definitely serves that purpose and will fill that need in our community, but it's not its primary mission for existing. We want the rec center to be managed with the minimal political interference from us, from council, right? This thing should manage, and that we should let the experts do it instead of micromanaging that ourselves. Make sure that there's adequate community access, maximizing its usage, maximizing financial and operational efficiency, make sure that those things happen. So again, the city administrator shall appoint a committee in section 3, and we talk about this. There'll be a member of city administration or staff, a member appointed from and by council, a member appointed by the TBID, and a minimum of 3, most likely more, but at least a minimum of 3 members from the community, again, specific financial, legal, operational expertise, that can help evaluate potential proposals for how this thing shall be managed. Same committee meeting, open to the public, all that kind of structure that we just talked about in terms of the community steering committees. Standard city processes for solicitation and evaluation of proposals. Nobody gets any special streamlined access here to get a proposal in without going through the proper processes. If they determine that the optimal approach is to contract management of the facility to a non-city entity, then we want them also to give us an idea of a recommendation on how do we manage that contract ongoing. Again, we don't want council managing the contract. Is that going to be a city administrator committee or some other operating authority or something like that? How do we set that up? So let that committee give us a recommendation there. And then there are some things, and this is most of the content from the last version of this, that we want them to consider. We want to make sure that, city residents who are paying for this through our property taxes are paying lower rates than non-city residents. We want to give the responsibility for that sponsorship, advertising, naming rights to the manager. We want to have that the revenue from those naming rights, sponsorships, advertisements, facility surcharges be used over the life of the bonds to help reduce that debt burden or that debt service burden on taxpayers. And we don't want those surcharges to hit things like our residents' normal daily admissions, memberships, those types of things. They're for events, they're for leagues, they're for tournaments. If you have a birthday party, sure. If you just want to go in because you've got a monthly membership and you want to go in and use the indoor walking track, we don't want to have facility surcharges on top of that. Annual budget and operating plan comes for approval by council. It works very similar to how TBID does through the budget process every year. We want a portion of revenues being used to set up a capital maintenance fund so we don't fall behind on our regular scheduled maintenance. And we want that committee the operating committee, whatever it is, to determine what that level is so that we're hitting that over time. And then finally, we want to make a point here that if the Parks Department is not going to be running this, we still need access, the Parks Department still needs access to that to run programs, right? So we want, if whatever solution is put in place, to have the understanding that the Parks Department will want a program out of that rec center, and that they will work with the facility manager to figure out the schedule and the cost structure that works best for both of those groups. Finally, that committee brings that recommendation here to council. We approve that, and then we move forward with that. So that is it for in terms of what we thought at this point we could put into the conversation on recreation center management. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Rips, this is in paragraph 3, the first sentence. The city administrator shall appoint a committee to determine the optimal management structure for the recreation center. You said several times, and consistent with other language in here, that committee will be making a recommendation. So I assume everybody's on board if we change the word determine to recommend the optimal management. Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. In D3, it says to reduce the amount of annual debt service, the facility manager shall generate and commit to the city $650,000. Let's say it comes up at $600,000. What happens? We need to have something that defines what is the recourse if he does or doesn't, something to that effect.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyette. Happy to take recommendations or suggestions on what that might look like. I'm not being facetious. I completely understand the concern. This number of $650,000 was determined through the study that the city helped fund, that we used from the Victus advisors to say what are the revenue opportunities that can be generated from the recreation center. And they estimated, and we took they gave us a range, and we took a midpoint of that range to set this target. So they thought if we were aggressive, we could do much better than this target. But if we were kind of lackadaisical about it, we might not hit this target.
Councilmember Boyette?
So maybe we should have the facility manager should have a goal of generating this rather than shall, because shall means the facility manager will come up with this amount of money. If not, then we just fire the manager because they didn't do it. It should have a goal of reaching this, something to that effect.
And it's back to our previous conversation, the surcharge from the swimmers and the ice users is part of the 650, correct? Okay, so that's the question. Mandatory language or more aspirational language, something in the neighborhood of. It's probably good to have a target. Specifically mention a number, right? How flexible do we want to be about that? Flexible. Councilmember Trickey said under his breath, flexible, but there's maybe some arguments on the other side. Councilmember Neese.
Mayor, I never like to use dollar amounts. I think a percentage of revenue or percentage of operations, something like that would be better, because that's going to actually grow over time. As your operations grow, then the commitment has to grow as well. So I think this probably does need to massage in some way to reflect the commitment, and maybe as of today dollars, $650,000 if that's what you think it is. But it would only be a starting point, and then making sure that it's tied to some other operational objective, but that's my 2 cents on that.
What if it said something like a substantial amount, parentheses, approximately $650,000? Councilmember Ripsis, does that get us to the level of specificity that you were aiming for to begin with?
Well, so just a little bit of context and where this came from. Again, it came from the Victus Advisors study of what they felt was possible for naming rights, sponsorships, advertising, and then adding on to that a general 10% of the program revenues out of the master plan that were estimated for what we should expect to see in terms of programs, events, those types of things that would run out of the rec center. So targeting a 10% of that revenue generation every year. And so you add those two numbers together, and that's how we got to the $650,000 a year, which gets us to approximately 10% of the total bond cost.
Although it sounds like included in that list was not surcharge on facility users? Is that true?
No, it was. That 10% was the surcharge, right? So increase our estimated revenues by 10% through the use of facility surcharges.
Oh, okay, thank you. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. I think what you're really talking about is recovery of costs, cost recovery. And for the operations and management of the rec center, no, okay. Then you're not talking about that. Oh, right.
Yeah.
What the aim is that whatever amount, that amount is that you're trying to recover as much as your costs as possible. Isn't that correct? No, never mind. I read it and it doesn't say that. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Boyette?
I guess my real concern is the word shall. That implies that he has to do this, or he or she, whoever the manager is, they have to come up with this. My concern is what happens if they fail miserably the first year and succeed the second year. The word shall is the problem.
Okay, Councilmember Owen?
I mean, I don't disagree with any of that. I think I assume we will approve the budget for this facility every year, and we can ensure that there's a certain amount of revenue being dedicated to debt retirement. I think putting a dollar figure in here risks the same thing that I'm concerned about on the T-bid, which is you're going to have a weird budget. So if they have to generate $650,000 just to cover debt service, then are they going to have an operating deficit that we have to come back in and backfill anyhow? So it might create a weird situation. I think maybe we can have some whereases, Gina, at the beginning that recognizes this capacity to generate dollars, in the preamble language of the resolution that captures the assessment that you're talking about and the importance of that number, but leave the directive language to, council approves the budget and shall ensure cost recovery as well as revenue sufficient to retire some debt.
So,
Okay.
yep, the only comment, thank you, Mayor, the only comment I would say to that is these were targeted revenues over and above what we looked at for operational costs, expenses, and revenues of the facility, right? So not affecting that financial statement or feasibility of the center, additional revenues that could be generated so that those additional revenues could be what goes to reduce the debt service, while as our operational revenues and expenses would offset each other with the help of the T-bid.
Councilmember Gillick and Councilmember Neese?
I think it's good to have some sort of, the hard numbers that Councilmember Neese mentions are challenging 10 years from now. So I wonder if we have a cost of living increase adjustment that built into it we say that establish this as $650,000 in 2024 dollars or something like that, and then have some sort of adjustment, maybe.
So you're suggesting some sort of a built-in, referencing some sort of inflationary increase?
Correct.
Okay. Just a reminder, this is for a resolution kind of for our own benefit. I don't, if we actually identify that party, of course, we'd want to get lots of detail, but this is fairly high level. Councilmember Neese, I'd recognize you, and Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor. Tom, I think I understand what you're getting at. Maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me. But you're saying is you want $650,000 raised through all these different services. I mean, they could do $700,000, and that extra $50,000 could go into operations and pay that. But you want $650,000 to go to Andy. Andy will then, when he looks at how much he's going to calculate the debt service to the taxpayers, he's going to take $650,000, reduce that, and then tax the people to assess it. And so to answer to Mike's question, if it's less than 600,000, well, then Andy's going to have to, raise, tell us that we got to raise the taxes a little bit higher. Okay, I'm agreeing with that, but I also agree with that maybe we should make sure we continue to have some type of inflationary.
Right. Mayor?
Councilmember Upsis, I apologize for, we'll.
Thank you, Mayor. Just
all
really
roads lead
quickly.
back to Tom.
So the only reason we might not want to consider an inflationary adjustment of those kinds of things is because this is targeted at retiring debt service. Our debt service payment will stay the same over 20 years. Right? So it could be easier to achieve that target over time, but we don't necessarily. The original intent was not to increase over time the share that's being reduced. Thank you.
Okay, and again, these are part of that $6.5 million number that was referenced in section 1, correct?
No.
Because we're talking about sponsorships, advertising, naming rights, temporary facility surcharges. Weren't those also included in that 6.5 million, or those were? Okay, financial commitment, section 2. Oh, I guess I'm thinking of the 6 million in grants. And that is not, this is a separate category. Okay, yes, thank you. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you. I think we're trying to get too specific on this because most of I would imagine sponsorships that your 650,000 is per year. And if you're talking about naming rights, they're probably in a contract that's much longer than that. So, or naming rights or advertising, sponsorship, those can be multi-year. So I don't think that 650,000 would be a really good number. It might be too low. And so I think we're getting into the weeds trying to try to come up with a number when sponsorships, naming rights go multi-year. So I get the general idea of what you're trying to do. I'm just not sure that 650, it may be a low number. Even though I know you took it from the middle of what was available, it might be a low number. Thank you.
So we need to reach some sort of resolution here and move on. So Councilor Upsis, based on the conversation you've heard, do you have any summary and direction for you and Gina to work on next version of section 3D, little 3, about what you would propose to revise that language, if at all?
Thanks, Mayor. I guess, again, the context of this being wanting to set a target, and primarily this will be, again, it's a big part of the commitment from the ICE, the aquatics, the court communities who don't even really have a single representative head, to help fund the construction of this facility. Right, and so that target of approximately 10%, a little more than 10% of the total construction of the facility is both feasible based on the studies that we've seen. And again, it wasn't midpoint, so yes, it could be low. Let's hope we were low, and that we'll be really aggressive in getting those sponsorships. But plus the facility surcharges that the groups have agreed to participate in and see the need for. So I think that's what the context of that is. And if there's a better way to represent what we're trying to get at there, I'm happy to do it. I don't know that I've heard a better approach than just putting in what that 10% number is. But maybe we just need some additional kind of fudgy language to say give or take.
Yeah, talking about substantial amounts, I personally see the value of having some number or at least reference to a document that people could look at to be more specific. Otherwise, you don't know if you're talking $10,000 or, $6 million. I find some value in some reference of specificity. Doesn't have to be quite this specific, but there's value there. Chris and Councilmember Joy?
So a
And
couple of
Councilor Wyatt?
thoughts that come to my mind, Mayor and Council, is we're referencing the Victus study, right? So maybe there's a wordsmithing there that just calls that out. We're looking at we're getting guidance from a study that was done here in 2023. That's our guidepost. And to deal with the inflation or that, and these are whatever dollars the study used. If they're 2023 dollars, then they're 2023 dollars, and you expect in 27 and 30, they're going to be different dollars. But maybe for the purposes of this resolution in the broad sense that it is, we broaden this back out rather than being
So some reference to the Victus study, making it clear it's a big number and call it good at that. Is that what I'm hearing?
The Victus study plus, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Victus study plus the master plan, which included the operational pro forma, and those two things combined, lead us to a target in this general area to be determined as part of the facility manager, arrangement.
Sounds good to me.
Add to that, rewrite the first half of that. So the city will set an annual specialized revenue goal based on
Those sources. Sounds good. Council members Joy, Boyette, and Gillick?
Well, the figure of the 10%, can that be part of that answer to what that number should be? That 10%, maybe, the number that you would arrive at.
Okay, Councilor Boyette, did you have anything to?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the facility manager isn't going to be hung out to dry if he misses, or he or her misses by a goal.
And we'll have to wrestle with that in
Right.
sort of any agreement with them, but at least this way, anybody we have a negotiation with, they have some idea what we're thinking. Councilmember Gillick.
Yeah, and I thank you, Councilmember Rupsis, for I better understand now, and I'm fine with the $650,000, and I believe Councilmember Neese is as well. We understand now that with the debt service, it's just going to be the same every year, so that makes sense. That's good to have a specific number.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Tricky, again, we're on section 4.
new topic. Well, sort of. Are we, when we're talking about the naming rights, are we thinking operational, setting them for operational costs, or might they be an offset from capital contributions?
Mayor?
Please, Councilmember Rupsis.
So in the context of this discussion, all those naming rights have gone into that 650 that we've just been talking about, not to help with operations, at least during the life of the bonds. After that, certainly that's a good source of revenue for ongoing management.
Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions in section 4, comments? Before we call that kind of a wrap on that section. Okay, I'm not seeing much. Hopefully, Gina's been taking good notes, and we can clarify some of that. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure where this would fit, but Tom, if you don't mind, as I was reading through this, and as I've always said, I think I have a concern over this whole rec center and who it's going to serve. And my concern is, and I think you addressed a little bit in here by saying you want to make sure that the residents of Billings pay a fair amount. But I think the operation is going to be expensive even for the Billings residents themselves. And so what I don't see in here is, whether it's recreation management or the finance, somewhere where it talks about really addressing those who are economically challenged, to give them some type of a discount, and again, city residents that are economically challenged, as well as senior citizens. I don't see where there's any call out to make sure those they're not as impacted, because they're going to be one of the most impacted by a bond and the tax increases, whether it's to their fixed income now being taken up more taxes, or their rent factors are going to go up if they're renting. And I think we owe them some ability to provide this facility. So it's not just used for the aquatics, not just used for the traveling teams that are not traveling now. So is there any suggestion that you have where that can be incorporated in one of these sections?
Councilmember Rupsis, the Partners in Park section.
Well, yes, so certainly the Partners for Parks has committed to helping raise funds to support financial accessibility, but I think your question goes a bit deeper than that in terms of the actual rate structure accounting for these things, as opposed to trying to help them on the back end because the rates are too high. We certainly could put that, I think, in that section of constraints, saying that we want, resident rates to be lower than non-resident rates, and we can put those things in there that might say, a special concern of council is the financial accessibility for seniors and economically disadvantaged citizens of Billings, and potential, recommendations to council should include, considerations for how those might be managed. I think we can't really say today how those can best be managed, but we'll be getting lots of potentially, hopefully, lots of different ideas on specific management proposals for this rec center, and a lot of them will have variations in terms of user fee structures and those types of things. So I think that's worthy to put in as an additional constraint, or and worded as a concern of council, not a mandate or a dictate.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think that's really important to make sure that'll really make it accessible to everyone of every economic means.
I guess I would just comment, although I share the sentiment, I would be focus on needs testing and actual need as opposed to age. By the time this thing is built, I will qualify under any definition of senior citizen, and I don't think it's fair to the rest of the community to give me a discount, and I don't think that just makes a lot of sense. So, Councilmember Joy.
And additionally, from the very inception, the rec center has always been an opportunity for us to partner with the schools that are in that area, so that we have opportunities for those students to participate and use the facility too. So if we're going to put that stuff in, I'll suggest that one. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Anything else, council, before we open for public comment on section 2? Councilman Rowan?
I had sent a message, well, one of my emails to council was with respect to some guidelines or parameters on the way this campaign gets run. And I noticed none of those got adopted. And I didn't know if that's because our conversations hadn't gotten there yet, or if they were of concern. I hadn't heard any feedback, so I just wanted to sort of reiterate my interest that I think we should be very clear and perhaps extra clear with the public as to how the campaign and the city's participation in that campaign is going to unfold.
Councilmember Rupsis?
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Purington.
And thank you. I saw all that, and I don't want to, I want to acknowledge that was in there, and it was a conscious choice not to add this in, because to me, this has not been an issue. We've done levies, bonds, all kinds of things over the years. And we have very specific rules stated in MCA and local codes of how these things can happen. The city can't, campaign, the city can educate, and all these kinds of, they're standard practices. And so to me, it didn't really seem to fit in this particular resolution. I understand the desire to say, the city isn't contributing to a political campaign or whatever. I just questioned the need to basically copy Montana Code annotated into here, when we all know that we have to do that. We've never had any kind of, to my knowledge, significant pushback that we haven't behaved appropriately in the past. So I didn't see a difference with this particular situation versus others. Happy to consider other perspectives there, though.
Okay, Councilman Purington, you want to comment on that?
Well, I guess I've had those same concerns, and it seemed early on in this conversation that, and Chris, you can correct me, because I thought that you said that the city would not spend more than $5,000, or you thought maybe around $5,000 to educate. And so I was concerned how much the city was planning to put forward on that. I think that's your decision, not ours, is my understanding. So I guess I wanted to know that. And, you know, that was the other thing is because of the conversations that we've heard from outside of council, from some of the stakeholders, is they wanted to be sure to convince the public this was a good thing. And I want to be very clear with the public what this is. I think some don't have the mindset of others that recreational amenities is a priority. When we look at public safety, how are we going to determine how recreation plays into our public safety? We had these few kids, I don't know, now it's probably been 3 weeks ago, that were hijacking that car. And, you know, my comment was, they wouldn't have been down at the recreation center anyway. So to say that it's going to, you know, keep kids off the streets and, you know, some of those things, I just think that's a stretch. So how we present it to the public, usually they're very concerned on levies, that the money is spent to what it's supposed to be sent for. And then how do we educate them? To me, all we're educating them on is how that money's going to be spent. I don't think we need to say it's going to be, you know, a crime deterrent, because I'm not sure that it is. You know, is recreation good for kids? Absolutely. But I share what you're saying, I do, and I think you probably know that. But anyway, those are my comments. I don't know how we direct Chris to, you know, project some sort of educational piece, so I'll be quiet.
Okay, Chris, it does kind of fall into your bailiwick, so Chris?
So first, I would say, absolutely, it's of paramount concern that we follow the law, and that's what we've done in our prior campaigns, two of the past, 4 years, in this organization as well as throughout my career, right? We cannot advocate for or against individuals running for office or questions that are on ballots. So that is a regular topic of, regular part of our discussion earlier today with the group working on our educational materials. Whether it belongs in this resolution, I mean, that's ultimately up to you guys. It does seem to me to be a different component. I do not mean to imply by you suggesting that you should put it in here or shouldn't put it in. It is a concern to make sure, period, that we don't lose years, because that's what's happened in other organizations and other communities. If we end up in court over arguments of did the city use its resources according to the statute. So that is certainly critically important to us, and for the obvious reasons that it's required by law. As far as budget, the number was higher than what you're recalling. I think we spent in the neighborhood of about $20,000 on the educational campaigns for each of the public safety levies. I could be off on that, but it wasn't 5. I mean, we had both a contract with folks to help make sure the messaging and the communication was accurate and clear, and we had a separate contract in making sure we were maximizing communication efforts in social media and other things to get information out on the education campaign. So I recall from our adopted budget this year is there was a flexibility of about the same amount that we would anticipate spending on the education side of this. We haven't signed any contracts yet. In fact, it was a meeting this afternoon as to getting some proposals from firms that can supply those kind of similar services to us again this year for this purpose of making sure our messaging materials are accurate, clear, and targeted as far as they communicate the facts and the accuracy of the information to the audiences.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you. Anything follow-up?
Just a quick follow-up is that I think we saw on both of the public safety mill levies that those gatherings that we had in the park or wherever, those community gatherings, those were not well attended. Those were, I mean, always had more staff.
Sure.
So I don't think that should be, there needs to be some other method of reaching the public, whether it's through the task force or, I mean, not all the task force are, up and running, but anyway, I just have a concern of how we approach this, giving public safety is our number one concern, and what the need in the community is. How do we educate a need?
Okay, thank you. I saw hands, Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Neese.
This is a difficult topic to discuss because it is hard to discuss it in the abstract without it feeling like a personal attack. And it's not my intention to be a personal attack. But the absence of a complaint doesn't mean the absence of a violation. And so I don't think it's fair to say that this has always been done correctly. It may have been, but the only thing that we have is there's never been a complaint. So the thing that triggered my concern was the stakeholders coming up here and saying, yeah, of course Chris is sitting on our private fundraising committee. Then we start coordinating message inadvertently. And that's what concerns me, is we start coordinating our expenditure. You guys don't need to spend on that. The city will cover that. We'll call that educational. It's those sorts of coordination of dollars and coordination of message and expenditures that I think start to run afoul. It's why in the city of Bozeman decision, they said if you're going to use the same agency, you have to have, that agency has to have some internal parameters set up so that they're not internally coordinating for you, because there are some things that you can't do. And so I think it's important that to me, the resolution is about a public commitment to transparency. We're asking for an enormous amount of money in a year when people are reeling about their taxes, and the very least we can do is be transparent and candid with them. And so to me, the belts and suspenders, even if it does reflect statute, shows that this city council is attentive to campaign finance law, intending to follow it, sending a clear message to staff that we expect them to follow it as well. And my hope would be that we make a commitment to express the proponent and opponent position, although for some that may be a bridge too far. But I think if the goal of this resolution is transparency, overlooking the private sector campaign is a miss, in my opinion.
Okay, Councilmember Neese, you had your hand up.
I did, Mayor, thank you. I have been through two different mill levies in the education process, and I thought the city did it well, but I think Councilmember Owen brings up a good point. It's just because someone didn't really file a complaint, we don't know. And so I think maybe there could be a spot for in this resolution where you have call another steering committee, but a education committee that is made up of some council members to make sure that that process is followed, and it is including the messaging that the council would like to put out there. So that may be something that we add to the resolution to include something like that. But I think I share the opinion with many of here that I think the city has done a really good job of educating. It is always, in a sense, I believe it is always typically saying this is what you're going to get, if it passes. Not so much go out and vote for this, but this is telling what the benefits are. You don't necessarily see the cons or what and that. So I think there's maybe some one-sided education, but I think it's been pretty balanced and fair. And I agree. I think the park outings were not very well attended, but again, that was a different topic. Now we're talking about parks. And so who knows, maybe they would be better well attended.
Okay, Councilor Rivers, Councilor Tricky.
Just one real quick point. I'm not sure where this idea that Chris is going to sit on any kind of political committee, fundraising committee, anything like that came from. It certainly was not said, or if it was not intended to be that way. He is not sitting on any of these committees. He's not engaged at all. That doesn't happen.
We'll ask Chris to clarify, and Councilmember Tricky.
So the request, the ask was there, which is it appropriate? And the answer was no, it's not appropriate to have the Parks Director or City Administrator or our PIO as committee members. No, both in this organization, our first public safety levy, we didn't have a pro group, if you remember. We did that our own. The second one we did, and absolutely there was a solid communication level I would expect on this, and in previous lives had, where I would anticipate the three that I just named would be regular attendees to those meetings, making sure the accuracy of information, the facts are there. Because that's critically important to the credibility and integrity of this organization, that they're not off saying things, well-intentioned or not, that are wrong. So I want to be clear, and we'll have to note that in our reports to the state of Montana. It'll say, Kukulski was at a meeting for an hour, 2 hours, what that meeting was for, and if answered, or if demanded or dug into, or I had to be depositioned on it. It's why am I there? I'm there to make sure that the information is accurate. And yes, that does, I'm not going to suggest that doesn't help me better understand where they're going and where we need to go, but ours has to focus on education.
Okay, follow-up, Councilor Rufus, on that?
Thank you, Mayor.
topic,
And
Councilor
I
Treaty.
do want to just say that Director Pig and Victoria were there last week at a meeting at Big Sky Economic Development. They presented, what the city was doing in terms of prepping an education campaign, and then left the room. For the rest of the meeting, they didn't participate. So we were very clear to have that kind of conversation, that's aside from the staff. I really do see the benefit of having, a statement in here about political campaign transparency. Perhaps we just put that in that very first section of the general project overview. This is the expectations, and it will follow, the city will educate, not advocate, with other committees may be happy to advocate one way or the other if they want to. There won't be any undue coordination between the two entities, that kind of thing. And
That's what I was going to suggest, a new
happy to put
paragraph
something like
7
that
at
in
in the section 1.
Briefly, and not to jump in front of Councilmember Tariki, but I think it actually also gives safety to the staff. I think that if there were a complaint, when staff could say, no, council's watching this, and we are accountable to them, I think we actually provide them some measure of support, so.
Okay, so broad general principles along the lines of what we've been talking about. Finally, Councilor Treaty.
I was just going to express my frustration at people expressing frustration in vague terms over and over and over again without putting something concrete for us to deal with in order to move forward.
And we have that, I think, now, so that's good. All right, good. Okay, anything else? We still, I do want to give an opportunity for public comment. We've got a couple people who've been here with us. So let's go, we can come back to council if you want to, but let's open it for public comment. Thank you for your patience. Steve, Jack, Hank, anybody online? Is there anybody who'd like to make public comment on this item number 2? Here's your chance. And you know the routine, 3 minutes, we need your name and address.
Jack Genoy, the Billings Chamber of Commerce at 815 South 27th Street. I just want to compliment you all on the process that you went through tonight. I think you made the document better. This aligns with our expectations and understanding of our scope of work and how all this is going to play out. And we're just really excited to get to work on this and glad that we can be of some benefit to the community. So thank you all for everything that you're doing on this.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Don't see any, so we'll close the public comment on item number 2. Council, anything else on council item 2 before we?
I guess.
Councilmember Joy? Okay, Councilor Rupes.
I was just going to suggest the next steps. I'd be happy to incorporate these and redistribute them to both council as well as Gina. And if we have any comments, I'd like to see, I think, based on our conversation tonight, I don't know that we have to have another work session. If we can just put these comments together and everybody say we're ready for, if I can get that out in the next, few days to a week, we get this right onto a business session, but defer to council's decision there.
I guess my recommendation is you'd work with Gina because, again, ultimately this becomes her document. So I would like to see her as engaged as possible, but Councilmember Neese?
Mayor, that's actually what I was going to suggest because because this is going to be converted now to a resolution and it will be different. Gina's going to have to make some changes here and rearrange things. And so, yeah, she's saying yes. And so I would like to see that document beforehand from Gina after you've made the changes that you've done. So thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, a very good discussion. We didn't have to go word by word, but we got phrase by phrase. So, I mean, it's very good discussion. And it really was there to address council members' concern. So I'm learning a new slogan, and it's how to find yes. So I'm hoping that the work we've done here tonight moves members of council to a yes, because that really shows the public that this is a problem-solving body, and we want to work to yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. On that note, we'll call item number 2 a wrap. And Chris, item number 3, anything in the way of upcoming agenda items? We've had some discussion on this topic, but anything else you want to highlight for us?
You got quite a consent agenda with a whole series of bid awards and second readings on a number of things. But as far as your action areas, primary is work that you've been doing on the limits of annexation map. And I think delinquent water and sewer is what I'm seeing from the draft, so.
Okay, keep your eyes open for that. I assume there's no public comment on that, but if there is, feel free. There isn't any, so we'll close the public comment period. Any items of general council discussion? Councilor Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to let the council know on Wednesday, the 9th, the legislative committee is meeting with the legislators, state legislators, and some city staff, and that at the Rock. It's the Zoot. Yep, Rock 31 at the Zoot at 11 o'clock, 11 to 1 o'clock. 11 to 1:30. Sorry. Wednesday, the 9th. Yes, not Thursday. Wednesday. So council members are welcome. I think having you there as part of the discussion with the legislators there, I think it'll help identify some of the issues and then help try to generate some action plans for future actions of the next legislative committee and council and legislature. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else? Councilmember Rowan?
Mayor, just quickly, that sort of triggered a thought. When might we hear an update on from our federal lobbyists? Has the legislative committee
yes.
been getting them, and I just don't know that?
Nope,
Okay.
September.
It's possible.
They're scheduled for September 11th to be here.
Okay, great.
So,
Councilmember Pearson?
well, I'm just going to add this because we are having lunch for our legislators. And if any of the council members are coming, you better let me know if you want to eat. Because I put the order in today, so we may have an addendum to that. So if any of you think that you want to be there, lunch will be served the minute you hit the door. And so we're going to work through lunch because it is a short time. But if you are going, let me know tonight if you think you're going to be there, and I'll add it in. Yeah, I've got you down.
Yeah. The lunch will be ready by 10:45. The gavel starts at 11.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of lunch, I had lunch today with the crew at the Burger Dive with Senator Tester and with Charlotte Tester, who is the sponsor of the ship. And I use that opportunity to mention to the senator the situation of the BBWA and potential future needs for federal funding there and help, and he gets it, especially the part when he says if that goes, all of the farmers north of town are without water for maybe forever, for several seasons. So that got his attention. He definitely understands it. He's also concerned about, floodwaters going through downtown Billings, but he gets that, and he recommended reaching out to Josiah Purcell as field representative anytime that they can be of help. So just on our radar screen. Also mentioned the West End reservation or our need for a West End rec center, or not rec center, but water resource facility, blah, 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 whatever our terminology is there. And he knew all about that and said, boy, that's got to happen. But he also didn't pull out his wallet and offer millions of dollars either. But it's on their radar screen, but we would have to drive any of those requests. And I know that we're looking at that. So just, he is aware of those issues, those two specific issues. Okay, thank you very much. We'll call that good on discussion. Any public comment on anything that was not on our agenda tonight? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
I did tell you I was coming.